evening, everybody, those who are tuning in for the live stream or who may be watching later. This is the February 16th, 2021 meeting, our budget meeting. I will now call it to order. It is 6 p.m. and I will start with the Territorial Acknowledgement by saying that we are on the territories of the traditional territories of the Wasanich people, Haishka, and thank you. We look forward to working together. I will look for, actually, I'm going to suggest an edit to the agenda. I'm looking to see if I can move item 6C up to 6B, and my rationale being that this was simply additional information that was to inform the budget discussion. I'm not sure if we got what we wanted, but what we'll be talking about will be in the context of the type of project that would go into the COVID restart grants that is proposed there for $25,000, and we are not going to be discussing tonight the actual merits of the Farmlands Trust. So I'd like to just move this up as a piece of information to be kind of taken into consideration before we actually start the additional budget discussion. So
I would move the agenda as amended.
Second.
Okay. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, moves unanimously. I will now look for approval of the minutes from our last meeting, February 1st.
So moved.
Or sorry. Yeah.
Second.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, I'll move unanimously. And we will move on now to 6A. We're doing our 2021-2025 financial plan preliminary discussions, and we have added a special public participation period. We have one speaker joining us live, Mr. Denny Jelena. If you can unmute yourself and pop in your video. All right.
Hello.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Denny Jelena, 2545 Oakville Avenue in Sydney. I'm speaking to you briefly tonight about the Artsy proposal for a Peninsula Arts and Cultural Grant Program. At its January 18th meeting, Council reviewed a proposal from the Artsy Community Arts Council for a grant program that would provide financial support for programs and initiatives developed by local arts and cultural groups and organizations. Artsy is seeking $16,800 from Sydney and lesser amounts from North Saanich and Central Saanich. This proposal was discussed at length at the January 18th council meeting, where it was decided to refer the matter to the 2021-22 budget discussion. I fully support the proposal from Artsy for enhanced grant funding. We often talk about Sydney's small town charm. I believe the arts and the cultural sector plays a key role in making this community such a great place to live and work. Our lives are enriched every day through the visual arts, theater, music, dance, sculpture, and literature, books. We're able to view world-class art and entertainment through events like art shows, community summer music in the park, performances by the Sydney Concert Society, the Folk and Fiddle Festival, the Sydney Literary Festival, to name a few. We're able to hear some of these groups on Canada Day and Santa Claus Parade as they march up the street. Arts play a major role in our community. They also act as a bridge to our First Nation neighbors. The Lantern Festival is a good example of that. They also provide a bridge across generations and age groups. For example, I understand that the Sydney Orchestra has provided support to the music program at Parkland High School. Enhanced grant funding would allow Artsy to provide additional support to groups such as these, especially for programming activities. This additional funding is even more important given the challenges some of the groups are facing as they cope with the ongoing effects of the pandemic. And as Councillor Fallock mentioned during the last meeting, the arts sector in Sydney is really suffering in many ways. Last week, Council also discussed at length the merits of rejoining the CRD Arts Service as a Group 2 participant or through a voluntary contribution. Views were mixed, but there appeared to be a support for a voluntary contribution. Regardless of the decision taken by Council on the level of support for the CRD Arts Service, I believe that council must focus first and foremost on supporting our local arts community, especially as most of our local arts groups are not eligible to apply for funding through the CRD Arts Service. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Jelena. And my apologies, I have introduced our speaker, but I forgot to introduce my colleagues. It's Councillor Sarah Duncan who will be in the chair tonight. To my left is Mayor McNeil Smith. To my right, joining me in the chamber, is Councillor Scott Garnett. And joining us by Zoom, Councillors Peter Wainwright, Terry O'Keefe, Barbara Fallett, and Chad Rintoul. And now we have one more public submission. I will look to CEO Randy Humble to read it aloud. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is correspondence from Doug Walker. He resides at 2127 Collinwood Road in Sydney. Reads as follows. Dear Mayor and Council, here is some personal feedback on Sydney's budget deliberations around economic development. I am writing from my perspective as the owner of a home-based business in Sydney, not on behalf of the Saanich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce or the Sydney Economic Advisory Committee. I understand that during budget deliberations, it may be necessary for Council to choose between the SBIA proposal for providing additional business support Sydney-wide and funds for developing a longer-term economic development strategy. Both proposals have merit and were supported by the EAC. I believe developing an economic development strategy is of higher priority currently. This is because the town, the SBIA, and the Chamber are already providing support and advice to local businesses, and the SBIA proposal would be incremental to that service. A significant investment in developing an economic development strategy using external experts would help establish direction and focus for future business support activities. We should be taking a balanced approach by working on both short-term support and long-term strategy concurrently. I therefore suggest the town start investing in developing the long-term strategy ahead of incremental investments in short-term support.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. We'll move on to the next item of the agenda, which will be the new 6B, the request for funding of Farmlands Trust, their email reply and additional budget information that was requested last time. If anybody has additional questions or information that they wanted or for clarification back to the Farmlands Trust, but otherwise I would simply look for a motion to receive this and move on with our discussion.
I'll move receive for information.
Second.
Thanks. I'll call the question. All in favor? Sorry, that moves unanimous. We'll move on to our new 6C, which is the additional budget notes and presentation by Mr. Andrew Hisik, Director of Corporate Services. You have the floor, Mr. Hisik.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of Council, my esteemed colleagues joining me from their Zoom locations as well as in the Chamber. Thank you for all your support as we develop this budget. You received a presentation introducing the budget roughly 2 weeks ago, and that was followed with a binder of materials, and there's a detailed staff report on this agenda. Tonight will be our first chance to really delve into it, but before we do that, I just have a few introductory slides, and then we'll get into the budget itself by section. So tonight it'll just be a very brief recap of where we stand, some of the major tax impacts, a little bit of additional information to support our budget consideration, and then we can move on to considering the budget by area. So as we know, this is part 2 of our 3-stage process, and tonight we have the opportunity to discuss and clarify various parts of the budget and get into in-depth discussion prior to final deliberations. We had an opportunity earlier for public input, and there, as I mentioned, there was a detailed staff report on the agenda to provide more context. Hopefully after tonight, we'll be considering a second draft of the draft financial plan on Tuesday, March 2nd at a special council meeting. Just a quick recap of this aspect that I presented last time, in that 2020 was a unique budget year due to the COVID impacts. Following initial adoption of a modest tax increase, we revisited the budget and we rolled that back, as well as instituting a 10% reduction in business taxes. So essentially, we cut our revenues by about $500,000, but left our services intact. And we made up for that lost revenue by borrowing from our internal surplus. And we knew at that time that we must eventually bring our tax revenues back to the previous level. Furthermore, we have to account for all the new tax impacts since then. We were partially bailed out last year by the unexpected Canada-BC Safe Restart Grant, which helped to replenish our surplus that we used to balance the budget. It also made it easier for us to maintain the 10% tax reduction as a starting point for 2021. It helps to bridge the gap between commercial and residential tax rates. And those Safe Restart funds will help us over the next 3 years as we transition back to a sustainable revenue level. But as mentioned last time, we should avoid making our task more difficult by keeping taxes artificially low this year. The more we defer the increases, the larger they're going to have to be down the road. So the Safe Restart Grants was a large one-time cash infusion to assist with COVID-19 costs and recovery. It's allowing us to, rather than having to make up $500,000 plus in the first year following the COVID impact, it's giving us 3 to 4 years to phase back to that level. Once again, we're not looking for outside ideas for how to spend these funds. We have firm plans in place already, which we'll reiterate tonight. Our focus last year was on reducing the tax impact for residents and businesses, and the remaining funds are earmarked for transitioning back to full tax revenues while accommodating the ongoing impacts. Any use of Safe Restart funding for other purposes will reduce our ability to phase back. This table is slightly updated from last time because of the decision at a recent meeting to increase the level of Safe Restart funding for the overnight fire staffing. So this shows what we did with the money last year, what we're proposing to do it this year, as well as the next 2 years. The amounts in red have not yet been approved by Council, and they either will be tonight or at the March 2nd meeting. Some of these items are supplemental items, while others are built into the core budget. And if that is approved, then some of the red items will turn to white next time out. So we could refer back to this table if we choose to deal with the Safe Restart funding in this manner, but a lot of these items are also duplicated on our supplementals table, and we might choose to approach it in that manner as we move forward. But if we want to go back to the slide, that's no problem. With that preamble, let's dive into what the draft tax increase is, and that's 4.45% going in. And that amount includes several new budget items that have not yet been approved by Council. It's easier to take them out if not approved than to try them, add them back in on the fly. And that's been our approach over the last number of years. This table breaks down where the tax impacts are in terms of changes to our core budget, incremental supplemental items, and then outlines the offsets to bring down the tax impact, which include the Safe Restart funds, an additional allocation of surplus funds for this year, as well as our growth in our tax base. As indicated last time, the impact on the average residence is roughly about $68 for the year, $78 including the water parcel tax, which is collected on the tax notice. I always like to show what impact our decisions have on the total tax bill. And these charts go back a couple of years because of the one-time reduction in school taxes last year, which are likely not going to continue. But in a traditional year, roughly half of the residential tax bill is municipal taxes, and a little less for the commercial properties. So decisions we make on our taxes impact less than half the tax bill for a commercial property. As we move forward in this process, we have to look at what are the most likely sources for reducing the 4.45% draft impact. We could look at capital projects that are funded from taxation. We could look at tax-funded supplemental items, as well as some discretionary transfers to the reserve. You might ask, why not the core operating budget? And that's mainly due to the use of surplus funding. So almost $500,000 was used from accumulated surplus to minimize the tax impact already. And that's on the expectation that we will be able to generate some savings in the operating budget and will break even at the end of the year. So if we reduce some of our core operating budget, that reduces our ability to break even, and then I would be inclined to reduce the amount of surplus funding. So I'm proposing we go through the items requiring review in this order, and it's somewhat traditional. We start with the utility budgets, water and sewer, move on to the supplemental requests, then to general operations, tax-funded capital, other capital projects, and finally just an overall review of anything we might not have covered. I'm going to briefly introduce each section, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments. So starting with the water utility, it's primarily the bulk water purchase as well as the operation and maintenance of our distribution system. It's funded with water parcel taxes and user fees, and a new rate structure and rates have already been approved by council. So the new rate structure, which was considered last month, it provides us sufficient revenue levels that we believe we need to ensure financial sustainability of the water system moving forward, gives us stable revenues to match our cost structure, and a better matching of fees paid to the benefits received from water. So people are paying for the availability of water and then for the actual use of it, because both have value. Now, we'll open it up to questions, but if, following any questions, council is satisfied with the water budget, a resolution to approve as presented or as amended may be made to get the water utility done tonight and not have it lying out there for March 2nd. With that, I open it up to questions about the water utility.
Thank you. I'll look to my colleagues if anybody has further comments, questions. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Chair. I support the water utility budgets as presented. I do have a question on the capital side. So on the water capital, we have a $765,000 budget for about 10 projects and 1.8 million budget. I'm just going to combine sewer because the question applies to both water and sewer. For example, under the water budget, we have 2 projects that have some property tax funding. And in the sewer budget, we have 3 projects with some property tax funding. All the rest of it is reserve funding. And I draw a note, I'm on page 62 of the budget binder, that we have two $60,000 pump station projects, sewer pump station projects, one on Harbor, one on Rothsay. And one of them is 100% reserve funded, and the other one has $16,000 of tax funding, or property tax funding, and I'm wondering why the difference.
Through the chair. Now, The water and sewer capital projects that are indicated as tax funding, what that really should indicate is current revenues from the water and sewer utility. So it's not actually a property tax impact, it's an impact on the rates for those utilities. So that's maybe not as clear as it could be. Now, the difference in those two projects is when these first surfaced a few years ago, I realized that on the sewer side, our reserve was getting depleted, and we simply could not afford both of those projects from the replacement reserve. So at that time, I looked for alternative funding sources, and that's what I came up with. It's just a way to pay for it that was affordable.
Okay, I thank you for the clarification through the chair. So what you're saying is that those amounts are, property tax amounts are not included in the 4.5% tax increase, that they're actually coming from the water rates, which is part of the water budgets?
That's correct. That first funding column is really intended to show current revenue funding, whether it's from taxes or utility fees.
Okay, thank you. And I would move adoption of the water utility budgets.
Second.
Okay, I've got moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Mr. Hisik, we'll let you go on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to the sewer utility, which the biggest cost is our share of the operation of the Unified Treatment Plant, which is the Peninsula Treatment Plant that's been in place for over 20 years. In addition to that, we operate and maintain the collection system. Similar to water, it's funded from a combination of parcel taxes and user fees, and we did not review the sewer rate structure as we did with water last year. That's a 2021 project, which we hope to report on in the fall. But we are projecting that we need a slight increase in our user fees of 50 cents per 1,000 gallons. And this would just take it back to the 2014 rate. So it has been lower than that for the last 6 years, but we need to increase it slightly to pay for a large increase, which is primarily due to the disposal of biosolids, the Heartland Residuals Treatment Facility. It was a large unexpected cost that hit us, and we have to pay for it through a slight increase in our user fees. It's not a town program, it was passed down to us, but there's no way of getting out of it until additional options for the disposal of biosolids are approved at the regional level. With that, I'll open it up to questions, if any.
Thank you. I'll look to my colleagues. Does anyone have questions, comments, or clarification? Okay, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Mr. Hisik, and this is more of a general question, which probably certainly relates to the context of sewer, but frankly also would have related to water and capital expenditures as a whole. So if you look at sort of page 59, which concludes the summary of capital projects within the 2021 budget line, it just seems that the total dollar value of capital projects is, in my mind, significantly higher than what we're seeing forecast for 2022 and 2023. And I won't go further out from there because I think those numbers start to get less applicable once we're beyond a couple of years out. But I guess my uncertainty with respect to that 2021 total, and of course under the sewer projects themselves is an example. There's some very significant dollar value projects there, and I know staff have addressed this, but in light of the type of building season that this would anticipate for capital projects, staff is comfortable that capacity is there to reasonably conclude this, and that I guess I want that reassurance because it looks like a very aggressive overall capital program for 2021.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it is fairly aggressive. There are 3 fairly large ticket items in the sewer budget. One is the purchase of a hydro excavator, which will be coming to council for a tender award next week. That's been carried forward for a couple of years, but we put it out to tender and got the necessary bids. So that is just a straight up purchase. The Ardwell sanitary sewer project is in fact a carry forward from last year. It is another significant project that was contracted out and is being carried forward for completion. It's in progress. The James White project, which is the largest of the 3, that's new, and in terms of capacity, that will also be contracted out. So it's really our capacity pressures will be to get it out to tender. And as mentioned, a lot of things have to fall into place for that to proceed late in this year. And there's a good chance that we'll just have it tendered, but not initiated until early 2022.
Okay. Thank you. I'll leave my comments there for the moment.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up question to Councillor O'Toole. And so that tendering would include both the design work and then the later actual work, construction?
Yes, it would. There are certain underground projects which we're not really equipped to do, as we found out a couple of years ago. So if it's a deep excavation, we will contract that out because it requires specialized equipment and expertise, and that's that kind of project.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'll look for further comments or questions. Okay, seeing none, I'll look for a motion to approve the rates that we've already set and approve this budget as
I'll
presented.
move the budget as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved and second. I'll call the question. All in favor? All right, I see everybody. Carry on.
Thank you. Moving on to the general operating fund. Just a reminder of the significant impacts for 2021. An additional $93,000 is earmarked for capital over last year's level, which was admittedly lower than normal. We tend to be in the range of $200,000 to $300,000 of current tax funding for capital, with the bulk of the capital program funded from reserves. The second listed impact is our usual increase to reserve contributions. We're adding an additional $80,000, and our reserve contributions for infrastructure are indexed to grow by 3 to 5% each year to keep up with construction costs. Supplemental requests, a net tax impact of $236,000, which is the single biggest item if you want to consider it as one. Debt servicing, $75,000 impact, most of that being a 5-year short-term borrowing for some fire equipment. $72,000 increase for the RCMP contract, $50,000 for fire personnel, $50,000 for the energy rebates program that was considered by council last month. Injecting a bit of color into proceedings, just to show you where the policing costs have gone over the last 12 years. We have gone from under 1.2 million to just under 1.9, so 700,000 over the last 12 years, with only having added one new officer a few years ago. It is a significant part of our budget, and it does tend to have an impact each year as the contract costs keep going up. I also like to highlight the level of community support funding over the years. It now makes up over $1 million, or 8.2% of our net operating budget. And just to clarify, that amount does not include some of the items that could be considered community support, but are not yet included because they haven't been considered by council, such as the economic development supplemental items. Community support items that require decisions throughout the budget process. One will be the renewal of a 5-year funding commitment to SIP, the $16,800 for Artsy under the supplementals, 10,000 voluntary contribution to CRD Arts, as well as 2 economic initiatives that are funded from the Safe Restart Grant, as well as a Safe Restart Grant program of its own. So we could, again, go back to this slide to consider these items individually or cover them under additional tables that we'll be looking at next. So moving on to supplementals, the biggest tax impact items are an additional $36,000 for the OCP review. I've identified $76,000 for the Climate Action Coordinator, though I've also indicated that we're using additional surplus to help offset that cost. Another item is the Energy Rebate Program, a separate IT position for the RCMP and Town Hall, a Junior Arborist position, and arts programs being Artsy as well as the CRD. All other items total $52,000. And this list does not include the items that are proposed to be funded from a Safe Restart grants. Now, if there are questions about any of the supplemental items, this would be the time.
All right, I'll put it out to my colleagues. Councillor Wainwright, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not really a question about the supplementals, but I think it's appropriate to raise it at this point. And it's really, I guess, the question of where are we trying to go? And I know the easy answer is, we're going to find whatever savings we reasonably can. But it's helpful to have some perspective on where we're trying to end up. And speaking personally, I would like to get the tax increase down to at least 3%. I'd be comfortable if it can go lower, but I won't be happy until we've explored, turned over every stone looking to get it at 3%, down to 3%. And to do that, we would have, by my calculations, and Andrew could correct me, but it looks like we would need to find a little over 170,000 in savings out of the out of our budgets, capital, general operating, supplemental, and it will be challenging to do that. And I guess I'm wondering if the rest of council is on the same page, or if there's a majority view to try to get it even lower. It would be good to know that.
Thank you, Councillor. I see Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In answer to Councillor Wainwright's question, I agree. It's going to be very challenging to see that increase come down. But like you, I came into this thinking, I had a comfort point in my mind. I was looking to try and see this get to 2.5%, but I recognize that that's fairly close to the 3% you've suggested. So I came in at about 2.5. I'll certainly look for colleagues to comment, but I did have a question, Madam Chair, unrelated through to Mr. Hissick. I'll yield to others who might want to address Councillor Wainwright's question first, however.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Councillor Fallett.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate my colleagues looking at taking this on a percentage basis and saying, let's find $170,000 that we can reduce the budget by. The concern I have with that is it sets an arbitrary figure that we work towards rather than going through and saying, are these projects, are these requests for funding, do they have value in our budget for our community or not? So for me, it's just coming at it from a different angle. I would prefer to stay away from the percentage basis. I respect that process, but I would rather look at it at saying, what projects here that have come to our table that are part of the budget do we want to keep and don't keep? To look at it of saying we've got to find $170,000 to cut from our budget is not something that I'd like to look at when we're reviewing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm okay with starting with some kind of amount in mind, and I think 2.5% to 3% is something that I feel comfortable with, knowing that last year's increase was, I think, 1.79, which we sort of eliminated. So something a bit more than what we cut back last year to sort of make up ground. And I guess why I also think it's a good idea, why I respect Councillor Fallett's comments. As I look through all of these items, I mean, there's nothing here that is a bad idea. They're all sort of worthy things that are being put forward, and some maybe more than others, depending on your point of view. However, I think our role is to, we can't say yes to everything. So I think, starting with some sort of amount to say we want to get it to 2.5% or 3%, I think is, for me, the thing that I'm most comfortable with. Knowing what we're aiming for. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would normally take the same approach that Councillor Wainwright is suggesting, and those areas or percentages you talked about I'm comfortable with, but I also agree with Councillor Fallett. This is an extremely challenging budget year given what's gone on and what we did last year, and I'm reticent to start suggesting percentages rather than going through and deciding what is of primary importance and things that we can find that we can pull out and see where we are in the end. Because I'm fearful of decisions made tonight and what impact they'll have going forward, because there will be. And so we have to be very careful and really confident the decisions we're making on things we're going to cut won't have some kind of trickle-down impact moving forward on taxpayers. So that's kind of where I stand. Thank you.
Is it everyone? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree with all my colleagues. I think, last year we took the approach that because of the significance of the COVID impact on our community, both residents, businesses, and community organizations, we brought the tax increase down to 0, which used a significant amount of surplus, and we reduced the business taxes by 10%. This was over and above the provincial government reducing business taxes by an average of something between 20 and 25%. We've heard nothing from the provincial government this year in terms of providing commercial tax relief as they did last year. Our starting point, as Council has discussed and as Mr. Hissick has presented through his budget presentations, our starting point for commercial taxes is and residential taxes is the lower rate that we reduced them to last year. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. We're now hearing about a third wave. The future is uncertain. We don't know. And I think we have to be mindful of continued ongoing impacts to businesses, to residents, and to community organizations. And I would prefer to see the tax increase come down to 2%. This budget has, to get to 4.5%, is using $550,000 of COVID restart funds and is using $450,000 of surplus funds to get to 4.5%. In the budget materials that we've received, we appreciate that our town surplus account, we have a policy in place that a healthy level is 25% of prior year revenues. And that level is approximately $3 million. Last year we used a significant amount, something like $550,000. This year we're using even though we used the surplus, we replaced it with the COVID funds for last year. So we're close, if I could turn through the chair to Mr. Hissick, we're close to back to our policy level of close to $3 million prior to taking out the $450,000 for this year.
That is correct.
So a question one could ask is, why do we have a policy of 25% of previous year's revenues and maintaining a surplus of $3 million? That's to be prudent. And in one term that could be used is for a rainy day. And I think the COVID pandemic is a pretty big rainy day. And I was serving on council in the 2009 term when we went through a pretty deep recession and had a very challenging time. And I would call that a rainy day as well. But this is a bigger rainy day, and it's not over yet. And so I still think, and this is to Councillor Fallett's points, I think we have to exercise our fiduciary responsibility and deliberate on the various aspects of the budget, just as we did earlier this evening briefly on the water and sewer capital budget or capital projects. I think we need to have the discussion we would normally have about the supplementals and any other aspects of the budget that we normally would. But underlying that for me is the pandemic, the fact that we do have the COVID restart funds, we do have the surplus, and I would be prepared to take, once we've gone through the budget and examined what we want to move forward with, I would be prepared to motion for additional surplus to bring it down to a consensus of council. For me, it's 2%. Others might be 2.5% or 3%. But that's something I want to keep in the background, if you will, as we do our diligence on the individual items that we're considering tonight and again on March the 2nd. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I am the only person who has not answered Councillor Wainwright's question yet, and then I'll be going back to Councillor Rintoul and Councillor O'Keefe for a second time. So I guess just briefly, I came into this with no concept in mind about the reduction in percentage. Like Councillor Fallett, I was looking at it as which projects would be able to be removed, and most of our largest projects are ones that were already funded by surplus or by grants, and those that were taxpayer funded tended to be the supplementals that we've either most recently added or during this term, and some of those related to taking action under our climate action plan, which was an emergency that we declared that predated this one. So I could not tell from when I went through the actual projects which I would remove. The largest ones, of course, would be infrastructure, but as Councillor Rintoul brought up earlier, this is a climate where we have a lot of difficulty sometimes getting things out to tender. The last few large projects we did, we only got maybe one bidder, and that was an effect on the price. So what I'm worried about is removing any of our projects in an attempt to try and get our taxes down lower when we could have got them out to bid, and we might need to try to get things out to bid and just get in line. And if we delay them and try to get them out to bid in later years, we may start running into problems with our infrastructure, as Councillor Garnett has pointed out. In an effort to save a few tens of dollars for our residents, we may end up with much larger problems for some of our residents who may be affected by, say, a busted sewer line or storm sewer or something. So I'm open to hearing what other councillors have come up with, particularly what the mayor has brought up at the idea of using surplus as a rainy day fund. And so with that, I'll head back to Councillor Rintoul, who had additional comments, I believe, that he wanted to direct to Mr. Hissick about the supplementals.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate as well the mayor's suggestion to how we could look to find funds to be able to reduce the increase to taxpayers this year. Another comes to mind, and that is perhaps looking more to utilize the COVID relief grant funds in a more aggressive fashion over the next 2 years, as opposed to right now. Mr. Hissick has presented the option to blend this essentially over 3 budgets, 4 budgets actually, because there was residual there even after 2023. Going into 2023, there's still $555,000 that would go into 2023. So I can't help but wonder if we didn't use those grant funds, look at them, through a more particular lens in 2021 and 2022, if that couldn't help us. And one item that comes to mind would be from the community support items requiring a decision, the ArtC Local Arts Grant Program. I don't know, for 1 year, given the climate we're in and taking into consideration some of Mr. Jelana's comments earlier, it could very well be that support for those grant programs could come from COVID relief, which right now we haven't identified as doing that. My question through to staff, I haven't seen it, and I think it would probably be in the general operations section. We have carried forward a project certainly from 2020, possibly from 2019 budgets, that related to civic site analysis. And as I recall, in the 2020 budget, it was around a $50,000 project to assess civic sites. And we're getting into, as we go through this process, some capital projects that probably would have been nice to have had that insight from that civic site analysis to be able to make some decisions. I refer to additional money being spent on the town hall, for example. I know we just spent we budgeted $450,000 for a new roof last year. This year we're looking at some $100,000 for electrical. Those things I find challenging given the age of the building and the useful function of the building as it is now. And so my question, Mr. Hissick, if you could address that civic site analysis and let us know where it is in this budget and when we would expect it to be carried out.
Thank you, Councillor. That particular initiative was addressed in the semi-annual report to Council when we were talking about the COVID impacts on capital projects and operating items. That was one casualty of the COVID year where we simply did not have the capacity to take it on. So it is $50,000. It is included as a carry forward in the administration operating budget, fully funded from previous year's funding. And we expect to undertake that in late 2021, early 2022. And while it would be useful to have that insight before additional investments in the town hall are made, if you look at the roof as well as the electrical project, and you take, say, a total of 450 to 500,000, divide that over 5 years, that's 100,000 a year to keep this building usable. And we're at least 5 years away from any new facility here, if not longer. And these are, if we thought we could limp along without these investments, we would certainly not be bringing them forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Madam Chair. Just in follow-up, I would think because we've seen this in our 5-year plan and certainly was meant to be actioned in 2020 that I would like to see it now that I know it's here in this budget. addressed in 2021, as opposed to what I thought I heard. It might be a suggestion that it carries into 2022. I think it's important. And, we've talked about 2 projects around Town Hall. There's also something referenced for 2022 around drainage for that property as well. And so, the list will go on in an older building, and the sooner we're able to have a discussion about the future of the building and its life expectancy, I would think the healthier these future discussions would be. So I would urge through the process that money be retained to have that civic site analysis conducted, and that it be expedited to occur in 2021. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, I'll go back to Councillor O'Keefe, then the Mayor, and then Councillor Wainwright. Mr. Hisik would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could kindly address the suggestion earlier made by council members about how to proceed in reducing taxes. I think the Mayor's ultimate suggestion that we go through and review all the new requests and deal with them on their merits, and then once we've concluded that process, we decide on a number we want to get to, and I would recommend additional surplus to get there if it comes down to that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Councillor O'Keefe, I'll go back to you then.
Thank you. Actually, I think Mr. Hisik just might have answered some of what I was thinking about in terms of the Mayor's comments about use of surplus. And what I'm wondering, so that surplus presumably comes from, well, our operations unused amounts for the year. So are we talking about reducing operational budgets then in order to have more of a surplus to, or less operating expenses? Is that what we're proposing? I just want to clarify the Mayor's intention there.
In the short term, no, because we already have that money. It just means it might dip below policy level, but as pointed out, it's only policy, and we can choose to be below that level, and whether we make it up or not is a future council decision.
Okay, and then just one more clarification, if I may. The 550,000, my recollection is that was a combination of the 1.79% tax reduction that we gave to residential taxpayers last year, and then the 10% on commercial taxes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And my recollection is that it was actually the case that on the residential side, there didn't seem to be an issue with most of our residential taxpayers in terms of being able to provide their to pay their taxes last year. Is that also correct?
I don't think we have enough information to determine whether it was an issue or not, but based on when the taxes rolled in, I think based purely on that, it seems like there was less impact on residential taxpayers than commercial.
Right, okay. And I guess where I was going with it is that, we're assuming that residential taxpayers would need that same support in the coming year, and so hence that's included in that 550,000. But if we recognize that might not be required, how does that impact that 550,000? Well,
how to unpack this one? Let's see. Well, I think we initially have to come up with an ultimate budget number, which will lead to a revenue requirement. How we then choose to allocate that ultimate tax increase is a somewhat separate conversation. But right now, that 550 addresses are getting our revenues back to the level they need to be before adding new programs and services. So I have a hard time dealing with it in quite the manner that you are suggesting. I think we need to go through our process, come up with the budget, come up with the funding required, and then maybe have that discussion around how to collect it.
I guess what I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around is that, am I correct in that with that 550,000, we're giving residential taxpayers a break of roughly 1.75% right off the bat? Am I understanding that correctly?
Not quite. That 550 in the 2021 budget is just to get us to a starting point. Right now, there is no reduction for any segment of taxpayer beyond that. That number just gets us to square one, and then the rest of the budget will impact how much more revenues we will need in 2021.
Okay, that's good for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I had Mr. Mayor next and followed by Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Chair. And just a quick follow-up on Councillor O'Toole's comments. I'm glad he raised the facilities because it's top of mind as well. And just a question: is there a reason that $50,000 project doesn't appear as a capital project, given the variance of capital projects that we see under capital?
That was actually an operating item. It was a supplemental item because it's essentially just a study. It's not capital. So it doesn't appear because it was last year's item that's simply carried forward. And we've had no indication that you don't want to proceed with it, so we haven't identified it for reduction.
Turn to Mr. Humble.
Yeah, Mr. Hummel, go ahead.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that it is identified in our strategic plan as a project in Q4 of 2021. So it is there. It is contained within our strategic plan.
Thank you. Could I continue, Madam Chair?
Sorry?
Could I continue, Madam Chair?
Go ahead, of course.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification, and I appreciate that. Mr. Hissick has said, given the significance of some of the capital improvements we've done, whether it's the roof last year and the electrical that has to be done this year, while it does give us 5 years, or you can amortize it over 5 years, if you will, there will be some additional, as Councillor O'Toole has indicated, such as the drainage. But I think we do need to move forward, and I would certainly encourage or concur that we try to do it in Q4 this year as a priority. I have two other things to turn to, and one is just clarification of Councillor O'Keefe's comments. So last year the 550,000 was to reduce the residential tax rate from 1.79 to 0, was to reduce the commercial from 1.79 to 0, and to reduce the commercial by another 10%. So just for that clarification. My question goes through the chair to staff, goes back to policing costs, which you went to the chart earlier, Mr. Hirsick, to show the increase over the last 12 years. And so the $75,000 increase this year would be on roughly $1.8 million budget from 2020. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If one was looking at a percentage basis. Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there's something they would want to raise, but one of the areas I would like to turn to is the Economic Development Fund, which is laid out in a certain fashion this year at $100,000 and showing a unallocated amount of $37,000. And so that is, I think, page 23 or 24, which we haven't got to yet, but I will just put that on for the list for consideration. Thank you.
Councillor Wainwright, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is a question for Mr. Hissick and regarding the Safe Restart funds. In our supplementals, we've got an additional $36,000 for the OCP review process, and arguably that additional spending is related to our community engagement being delayed by the pandemic and some additional costs that have been incurred because of that. I'm wondering first if that is in fact going to meet the criteria for the Safe Restart Fund, and if so, I'll simply say that I would much prefer to see the 25,000 that's currently earmarked for Safe Restart grant program go to the OCP review instead. That would eliminate the need for 25,000 coming from property taxes. So my question to Mr. Hissick is, would that OCP review 36,000 extra reasonably meet the criteria for the Safe Restart Fund?
Thank you, Councillor. In my mind, no, because that additional funding for the OCP was already on our books since last year. What we've been able to do is reduce it from the original projection of 100,000 to 36 by allocating some additional building permit revenues from last year, as well as additional savings.
Okay, so perhaps not the full 36, but I know from some of the discussions that at the OCP Advisory Committee that there have been some delays that are resulting in additional costs. So I'm just wondering if we could use, assign any of the funds towards that as opposed to that grant program. Or is that something staff would have to look into?
I've taken great pains to try and identify every new expenditure that may qualify, and I believe I've done a thorough job. I think that one would be a bit of a stretch because on the expenditure side, there is no incremental amount for the OCP project. It's the 100,000 of new funding that was always projected for 2021. So perhaps it would help if we considered Safe Restart funding as well as additional surplus as somewhat interchangeable in getting to our goal.
Thank you.
Thanks. Looking at the mayor's face. Does anyone have further comments, questions for Mr. Hissick? Or is anybody starting to want to make motions regarding any individual items?
Madam Chair, the Economic Development Fund is displayed as the mayor had requested. If this is a place to start, perhaps.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So in turning to that page, page 25, I guess it is in our budget package. So we can see that for some 10 years now, we've had an economic development fund at about $100,000, and we've had allocations each year, varying amounts that have been less than the 100,000. This year, for 2021, it shows after the current commitments to the BIA in the EDC, 33,000 unallocated. We have no other section, if you will, or area in our budget where we operate this way, where we create a fund and leave an unallocated portion there. And I can speak from previous term on council, but also in the intervening years, that there were many years when there was unallocated funds and they were not rolled over to future years. And I think we have a full budget in terms of supplementary requests. We have two additional economic development requests that are not showing here. They are showing under because their suggested financing is COVID restart funds. But I would I'm prepared to move that we remove the unallocated portion of 33,000 from the 2021 budget and future years as well.
Second.
I'll call the question. All in favor?
Just a point of order. Sorry, could you call for discussion before you call the question, please?
Sorry, of course. Thank you. Councillor Rintoul, go ahead.
No, I didn't have any discussion. I'm in support of the motion, but I just noticed that I kind of noticed we've been doing that all evening, and there was a couple occasions I thought we might just want to take a breath. That's all.
All right, I have moved and seconded. I'll look for discussion. Somebody who isn't Councillor Rintoul. Okay, seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you. Going on, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
And just for clarification, that would reduce tax money?
Yes, it would reduce it by 33,137, and Councillor Wainwright was accurate in his earlier projection of what it would take to get down to 3, which is just over 170,000.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll move along. Did anyone have further motions to make regarding specific supplementals? No. Oh, Councillor Rintoul, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Don't know that it's a motion, but I'd like to go back to slide 22 and just clarify through to staff what the implications would be, or for your assessment, Mr. Hissick, of the Artsy Grants Program at $16,800 and the CRD Arts Voluntary Contribution at $10,000. What would the implications be of funding those through Safe Restart funding? And I only make that suggestion because we have not supported either of these in this manner previously. So it is new funding. And I think through the lens of looking to pay some special emphasis and attention to the arts and culture sector, that this could relate to Safe Restart funding. So I'll just yield to your comments, Mr. Hissick.
Again, a bit of a stretch in my mind in terms of Safe Restart. I suppose the argument could be made that we're providing grants to arts groups that are suffering, but I don't have enough information to confirm that at this time.
Okay, and how does that? I'm comfortable with it, but how does that implication affect what area of the budget? That $26,800.
So these are tax-funded supplemental items, and if not approved, we'd cut another 26.8 off of our projection.
Okay, so I certainly respect your insight with regard to what may qualify for the program. In my mind, this is right up that alley. This is going to help the arts and culture section. There's no guarantee that either of these are long-term in nature. They're one-off in nature. I would be comfortable moving that these be funded from Safe Restart, but I'm also be comfortable, Mr. Hissick, if you'd rather do a little more research on it and come back to us at the next meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. If Council feels that this is funding intended to support arts organizations that may have been impacted by COVID, then I will yield to your judgment on that and use that basis as our argument for using Safe Restart.
Okay, thanks. I see Councillor Garnett, Councillor O'Keefe, and then the Mayor, so I'll go in that order. Go ahead, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My recollection is these two particular items are not one-offs. I was under the impression that this is funding that we were going to have going forward, and that was the plan. So I don't see how they're related to COVID restart grants as well. I have a problem with that parallel. So from my perspective, I thought this was something we were going to do in terms of how we were going to fund our arts and cultures in the community and in the region going forward in our budgets. Thank you.
You're right, Councillor. It was intended as an ongoing item. But that's not to say it has to be approved as such. But again, if Council is comfortable with my interpretation of how the funds will be used, and that might satisfy the criteria, it could be just 1 year's funding from Safe Restart, and next year it could be brought back as a tax-funded item.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm with Councillor Garnett on this one as well. I understood that these were things that we were proposing. They were going to be long-term programs that we were going to fund. I also know that there's other sorts of programs available through the provincial government to help arts organizations. So I think, you know, those that's the route they should be going to get funds. And I guess I also worry about if we take it from the COVID restart, I don't think it's a fit. And also it just kicks the can down the road a bit, because these are things that we were planning to do anyway. So it's just something that we're going to have to consider as tax funded anyway. So I'm more inclined to make a decision on these tonight as in terms of whether they're tax funded or not. My initial feeling is, you know, in complete support of the local artsy grant, not feeling comfortable with the CRD voluntary contribution at this time. So that's where I'm landing on those two things. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Gelena in public participation spoke extremely well to reasons to support the local arts grants program. And I would move that we approve that $16,800 supplemental in the budget.
A second.
Second.
Okay, a mover and a seconder. We'll go to discussion. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm willing to support this one, but I'm reluctant to be dealing with the items on a kind of onesie-twosie basis. Like, I'm okay if we're deciding to eliminate something, but every time we cherry pick something out and approve it, it just makes the other stuff harder. And you know, if we're going to wind up, for example, having to balance item A against item B, well, we can't really do that if item A is being pre-approved. I mean, I suppose we can always make a motion to rescind, but that is always more challenging. So I would just encourage us not to go that particular route. I would have been much more comfortable. Like, I know that the voluntary contribution to CRD Arts is a bit controversial. If there is not a majority in favor of that, I would be okay seeing that go. But like I say, I just would encourage us not to try to cherry pick items out and approve them in it, you know, early in the process.
Okay, I will go back to Councillor O'Keefe, followed by the mayor.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think what Councillor Wainwright is proposing is a good idea. Maybe continuing to go through these things to have some discussion, but maybe not necessarily making motions right away, and until we've kind of got a better idea of bigger picture and where some of us are landing or feeling about some of these things. Also, just a question in terms of process. Does it matter if we, do we have to make motions to take something out or to put things in? Because my understanding from Mr. Hissick is that everything is in there already. So does it make a difference whether we vote to leave things in or to take them out? I don't know if that makes a difference or not, if one is easier than the other.
In preparing a second draft, it would be useful if items were removed by resolution. Then I have a pretty clear idea that it shouldn't be in the second draft.
Okay.
It's not necessary to add things by resolution because they're already in there, as you mentioned. So, but having some general discussion about support or not for an item, the ultimate decision could be left to March 2nd. But if there's some that there's a fairly clear consensus that it won't have support, then taking it out now will just make the job a little bit easier at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, I believe I had Mr. Mayor going second, but it's been pointed out to me, Councillor Fallett has had her hand up for a while, and I've been missing her because it's right in front of her little vertical face. So I'm going to let Councillor Fallett, because she has not spoken yet in this discussion, go first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate Councillor Wainwright's point of view about cherry picking. I think there's merit to what he was saying. This came out simply because Councillor Rintoul was looking at alternate form of where we get the funds for. And so I just want to briefly speak to that part of it. The Artsy Grants Program is under ongoing requests. In the on page 13 under the supplemental requests. So, and I would hope, I sincerely hope that the discussions that council had in the months coming into this and thinking about arts, that we aren't looking at funding arts as a one-off, that this is something that we as a community believe in and want to fund. So although I can see there may be aspects of that funding that would come under COVID restart, etc., I really don't want to get into something that I see as what we as a town, who we are, and our arts image is a big part of who we are. So I just want to speak to that part of it, but I would like to just say, we've moved and seconded, can we just, if everybody has, I mean, if there's somebody left to speak, obviously speak, but I would like to just say, let's just move and second it and then call the question on that one, and then we can go to what Councillor Wainwright was suggesting, or to pull out things that we would suggest that we want to eliminate from the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. I'll go to the mayor, and then we'll try and wrap this one up on whether we're going to go by onesie twosies, as Councillor Wainwright said. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it was just that we were on that topic, and I thought there was likely strong support for that particular initiative in the supplemental items. But I also concur with Councillor Wainwright, and given that we have in mind a tax increase lower than what is before us, and while we have an option of surplus or COVID funds, we still want to review these. But I think if there are items that an individual councillor, or if we are aware from previous discussions that colleagues have some concern, then it would be a good idea to have a conversation about those uncertain items first. And so I would move to remove that motion from the floor.
Thank you, and that's approved by the seconder. Thank you. I was going to request that if you hadn't got there. Going forward with this, I believe what Councillor Fallett brought up, that since this was ongoing, and we've had discussions about this before, the one that Councillor Wainwright had mentioned was the voluntary contribution. I feel like we also discussed this one before and went through this, so I'm not sure if we want to talk about removing that one. I don't know if we would look for motions to continue, because again, as when we discussed with that one before, it was similar about ongoing supports for the CRD. So I don't know if we want to include that now or simply move on to actual one-time supplemental funding. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. My suggestion is that if one of us personally feels that they have a concern of supporting one of these initiatives, then they can bring it forward, motivate for removal, and we can have the discussion and the vote. If no one is willing to do that, then there is, I think, a consensus there. One item I would like to turn to is the Safe Restart Grants Program. And it's not that I'm not supportive of. I do have some questions about it, and I would like to hear from colleagues on that as well. So I don't wish to make a motion yet, but in terms of conversation about it, I spoke with Mr. Hissick earlier today, and we colleagues are of course familiar with our regular grants and aid program, which has a budget of some $15,000 or $16,000 we do on an annual basis. We usually proceed with it after we finish the main budget. It's a line item. And in terms of process, applications were due for that grants and aid program by January 31st. So we do have all of the submissions for that grant and aids program. This looks, this item, Safe Restart Grants Program of $25,000 would be to establish a new grants program. The thought that I was giving to this is that if there had been time, it might be a good idea to actually top up the grants and aid program, our regular grants and aid program, with COVID restart funds, because I could foresee, even though I have not seen any of the applications or I don't know any of the applicants this year, I can foresee a number of applicants referring to COVID or the impacts of COVID when they're making their application. And so I think it's still feasible for us to use COVID restart program or COVID restart grants to top up the existing grant and aid and just go with the applications that we have, or we could proceed with a separate program, and I open that to colleagues for discussion.
Thank you. I see Councillor O'Keefe. Anybody? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I like the mayor's idea of putting some additional amounts available to the community or to other things that that we think might be useful about around the town in terms of increasing the community's resiliency. And I know staff have indicated that they're not looking for more ideas. However, I think it's important to give the community an opportunity to generate some ideas. Also, perhaps look at the ideas that were generated by the consultant that we hired during the earlier in the pandemic. There was a number of things there. I don't know if there's things that maybe were discussed at the COVID Recovery Task Force that maybe didn't come forward because at that time we didn't know that there would be this pot of money available. So I'm interested in using some of the Safe Restart to look at some of those other things. I would see it as something over and above the grant and aid, and something that could be things initiated, suggested by members of council, members of the previous task force, or community groups as well that have projects that would be specific to community resiliency and getting through COVID. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Rintoul, did you have your hand up or were you just, no? Okay, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A concern I have about creating a new grants program is the overhead that goes with that, coming up with the criteria of what makes you eligible to apply for the grant program. There'll obviously be some forms, we'll advertise for it. There will be some staff time involved in putting the thing together. Increasing the scope of our existing grant program is certainly a lot less effort, and we've already again, I haven't seen the applications that have come in, but every year we always have requests for support that well exceed the budget that we have available. So I have no doubt that we're going to see a number of applications in that pile that would be potentially eligible to draw on the Safe Restart funds for. The thing though, this is a very challenging budget year, and I don't really see the need to go out and create a separate program. I think like people have the ability to suggest things that we should be doing, for resilience. In fact, that's what public participation in our budget meetings is all about, is giving people the opportunity to suggest things that we should be doing with the town's money. Anyway, I am overall not supportive of a separate Safe Restart Grants program.
Thank you. I'll take my opportunity to speak for the first time, and then I'll go back to the mayor who brought it up. But I am supportive of what the mayor has brought up about the idea of simply having a pot of money to be able to top up our existing grants and aid program. I believe last year we had $75,000 worth of applications for our $15,000 pot, so I'm sure this year will be much greater, and I imagine most of them will start with, due to COVID-19, we've had even additional expenses. So for sure, this would apply, and for all the reasons Councillor Wainwright suggested for administration. I'm not in favor of setting it aside to examine additional resilience, or to go back to what the Recovery Task Force came up with, simply because that should have been incorporated already if it was something that we would be doing for operations or for our infrastructure. I think that's our primary responsibility at this point as a municipality, is to make sure that we can continue offering the services. So with that, I'll go back to the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can concur with Councillor Wainwright's comments with regards to administering a separate program, and add that I can imagine that if we've had a couple of dozen applicants to the grants and aid program and we open another program, are they going to reapply, seeing that to see additional funds, and what does that bring to the complexity of administering another program? Having said that, I would move that $25,000 of Safe Restart funds be added to our regular grants and aid program this year, in 2021.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved and seconded. Open for discussion. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll support that. I concur with the comments from my colleagues around administering these funds in particular. But I would like to pose the question through to staff, because we've just heard from staff that perhaps things like the CRD voluntary contribution to CRD Arts, which I never recall as being beyond a 1 year period. I think that's the reason we were looking at voluntary contribution, was because it was flexible and we wouldn't be committing to it. So I'll revisit that item in a moment. But with regards to this, Mr. Hissick, are you comfortable with topping up grants and aid with Safe Restart funds? Because you'd expressed some concerns about a similar approach moments ago.
What I would propose to do if this is approved is we increase our grants budget to $41,000. I would take the existing grant and aid applications, add to that the one additional applications we received from Farmland's Trust, and then it'll be up to council to decide whether to allocate all or only a portion of the $41,000 in funding. I think as long as we're careful not to allocate more than the 25 that we're adding to the grants budget to what would qualify as, let's say, COVID special needs, for lack of a better term, I think we'd be okay. So, for instance, if there was some funding to the Farmlands Trust, that clearly came in under an application specifically for Safe Restart funds, so that would be a valid allocation. And perhaps we'd have to spend a bit more time picking through the existing grant applications and determining, is this truly a good fit with the intent of the Safe Restart funds or not? So, while a little bit of extra administration, not as much as a separate program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay, so I will call the question on moving that 25,000 to additional grants and aid. You're all in favor, sorry. Thank you. Opposed? Okay, seeing that. All right, moving along. Okay, did we have, we made it, we went through the economic, okay, go ahead, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to speak to the request for additional or continual funding for SIP, if I may. And I'm hoping my colleagues can provide some parameters and clarity for me, but I do have some issues with it, and it stems around from the night of the presentation. As you may or may not remember that night, when the slides were up, I asked the presenter, particularly the slide about business growth and job growth and new businesses. I asked specifically if they had information on what had happened in Sydney, and was told that they didn't have the information with them, but they could provide it at a later date. Subsequently, I've not received any information from them, so I don't know specifically what there is in relation to Sydney. The problem I have with that is that I would have thought that coming to a municipality to ask for funding and a continued funding for 5 years, that would have been a question that would have been anticipated. So it's problematic to me that it wasn't thought of and the information wasn't at hand and subsequently hasn't come forward. So it seemed to me like a request just assuming we'd give the money. And although I believe they do good work, and Councillor O'Keefe gave a great presentation as new liaison, I'm looking for some clarity from other members of council as to why we should continue this, because as a member of council that serves Sydney, I want to know some direct benefits to my community from being a member of this organization and funding it. So I'm open to have colleagues help me out here. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thanks. And yeah, Councillor Garnett raises good questions. And I have to say, in the early years of SIP, I was a big skeptic. You know, I want to see, I'm big on, you know, let's see the return on investment. What is Sydney getting out of this? Where are the metrics and all that sort of stuff? So I've made a point to participate in a lot of the workshops that SIP has done and webinars. I've read through the Rising Economy Task Force. They have an economic development strategy for the Greater Victoria area, and they're following through with that as well. So what, in my sort of further research and understanding, I have a better concept of where our benefit emerges from this, and understanding what SIP is doing in terms of generating interest and trying to attract businesses to our region. And so when I've sat in on other sessions with the BC Economic Development Association as well, and the thing that I've heard most and I've picked up on the most from those other organizations focused on economic development is the importance of taking a regional approach to economic development. And so having an organization that does that for us in terms of raising the profile of the entire South Island, I think is valuable. You know, when you look at, there's one of those figures in the report, and it shows the movement of people throughout our region. And so that there's people doing business in Sydney that live in the West Shore. Our economy in our region is interconnected. You know, we benefit from other people, other businesses setting up in other parts of the region, because that's more people that have got money that can come out to Sydney and enjoy our waterfront and our restaurants and our little hotels and our bookshops and our museum. So I see the benefit of that more regional approach. We were also actually had a meeting today, and we were talking about other things where SIP could have value. I think I mentioned last time the community profiles. So they'll be working on a community profile for Sydney, so that will allow other people who want to set up business in Sydney to look at the community profile, have that information. Another key thing for us being able to benefit from SIP is having an economic development strategy in place and identifying what we want to do. Because once we have that in place, then SIP is in a better position to direct those external investors to Sydney. So if we say, for example, we want to, do something with our marine or our industrial sector, we've got some goals there. Once SIP knows that, when external investors come knocking, they know that this is something that Sydney wants to do, and they can send them our direction. So I think there's a lot of potential there. We just have to, wrap our heads around what we actually want to do so that we can take get the most benefit out of it.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been pretty lukewarm on SIP over the years, and I think that, so first I'll say I'm going to support it this time, and I think that Councillor O'Keefe's comments are good context for this. First thing is that the previous council basically kind of ignored SIP and let SIP kind of go its own way. And since they weren't getting a lot of interaction with Sydney, it's not too surprising that Sydney didn't get a lot out of it. One of the key things that SIP needs, if they're going to do useful stuff for us, is understanding Sydney's economy and where we want to go and sort of what our strategy and vision is. And we don't have that. If we're not prepared to do that, and make that available to SIP, then participating in SIP will be a lot less valuable. But since we are looking at doing that, it looks like we're going to give SIP the tools to let them do a better job helping us. And certainly this council is a lot more engaged with SIP. And because of that, SIP is likely to be more responsive. I agree that there's some concerns about follow through on reporting and that kind of thing. But with an active liaison at SIP, I think that's going to be a lot less problematic. So for example, our liaison could simply follow up on that particular thing. You said you were going to bring forward the info. Where is it? So anyway, I think that it does not make sense to put all your money in SIP and ignore your local economic development, because the peninsula is a region. But it also doesn't make sense to entirely focus on the peninsula, because things that happen in the greater region do have an effect on us too. So in an ideal world, we would do both. And I think that this is not the year to withdraw from SIP. So I'd be prepared to, see it remain. We could potentially say we'll give you a 1-year commitment rather than the 5, but I'm open to the 5-year commitment as well.
Thank you. I'll go to the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for a colleague's previous comments. I'm very supportive of SIP, in particular, having been a participant in the Rising Economy Task Force and the results that came from that. When I served on the Partners Committee, it was under discussion about how individual council elected representatives might have concerns with regards to return on investment in the individual municipalities. And one of the things that SIP has tried to stress is that while we do have municipal boundaries for 13 municipalities in the CRD, our economy doesn't have boundaries, doesn't have those municipal boundaries. Businesses do business throughout the region or beyond. Employees come to Sydney, and as Sydney employees go elsewhere. And so the success of our regional economy is success for Sydney. And in participating in the Rising Economy Task Force, I was joined by general manager from a Sydney hotel, the executive directors from the BIA, from the Chamber, other business leaders, certainly the Airport Authority, and others. And that was, I believe, why it was successful, because business leaders, large and small, from around the region were participating in the Rising Economy Task Force for a regional basis. So in terms of some of the local benefits, or more local, the Blue Economy initiative that they've already obtained senior level government funding for, will involve Sydney marine businesses. The marine economy is very important sector for Sydney, Sydney North Saanich. And as well, SIP has been an organization that has had success in bringing First Nations and their economic concerns and interests together as members of SIP. And I think those will bring benefits, have brought benefits, and will bring benefits for the 4 nations on the peninsula. And I'm prepared to make a motion to support 5-year funding, year renewal for SIP.
I would second that.
I'm going to go back to, is this something we should be approving individually, or since it's already in the budget, should we simply be leaving it unless we want to remove it? I guess Mr. Hisik, can you weigh in on that?
This is an exception to the general rule, and they have asked for a 5-year commitment, so I think a motion to that regard would be more than sufficient.
Okay. Okay, so I've got it moved and seconded. I'll open for discussion and start with Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank fellow members of council. I think it's good information. It gives me some clarity, and I think also, more importantly, it provides some valuable information to the taxpayers in our community to know where their money's going and how it's benefiting the community as well. So thank you very much for your comments.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll just take my piece. Like many on council, I've been ambivalent about SIP for many years as well. It's a large amount of money. And I probably have the most unconventional views regarding economic development here, but I have noticed that SIP, when they are given a suggestion from one of their stakeholders, whether it was the First Nations, whether it was, the nonprofits and I'm going to go with the food policy sector because that was my jam, was they actually went with it. If there's something that they can action and they've got the stakeholders and they've got the money, they went for it. And we brought up abattoir study, and normally that's the kind of thing that would be kicked around for possibly years between municipal governments and the CRD as everyone tried to decide whose job that was in a region like ours. But SIP was able to take it and run with it and turn back a study just like that. So I've become quite a fan of SIP, and I'm happy to support this motion. So I will call the question, and we'll see all in favor. Okay. I see that was unanimous, so Councillor Fallett, were you just raising your hand late, or is that an opposition?
I'm in favor.
Okay, thank you. So we've had SIP go through as a 5-year funding. We voted on that. We have discussed our arts funding. Councillor Rintoul had briefly mentioned the $10,000 for the CRD. I don't know if we need to go back and if we want to discuss that with a motion now, or simply leave it in there as a one-time. Go ahead, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try this for what it's worth. I think there's a rationale, as I mentioned, to fund this from Safe Restart funding. And if I have any hesitation, it's the utilization of those funds, outside of the immediate, local area. But we're certainly doing that in other areas potentially as the process moves forward. So I'll move that the CRD Arts voluntary contribution for 2021 in the amount of $10,000 come from Safe Restart funding.
I'll look for a seconder.
Second.
Okay. I'll open for discussion. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not in favor of contributing 10,000 to CRD Arts, regardless of where the funding's coming from.
Sorry, I'll go to Councillor Fallett and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will support $10,000 to the CRD, but not from the Safe Restart Fund.
All right, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm with Councillor Wainwright on this. I'm not in favor of 10,000 to CRD Arts under any circumstances. I know, we've talked about perhaps showing support for the regional art scene. And to me, supporting the regional art scene doesn't mean that we send our money down the Pat Bay Highway to the center of Victoria. If we want to have a more regional arts economy, if you want to call it that, I think we should be building that out here on the peninsula. There's a lot of investment already in the Victoria core. I think there's a lot of potential for us to build more out this way. So, we heard in public participation and in past discussions the need for more programming within our own community. So if we were going to do anything at all, it would be to build that support for more arts out this way. So I'll take a pass on this motion. Thank you.
I guess I will speak briefly and then go back to Councillor Rintoul, who made the motion. Ordinarily, I would be in support, I think, of a voluntary contribution to the CRD. I feel Councillor Fallett had brought up before that we support in terms of buildings, in terms of capital. However, we have precious little amount in terms of programming for our local arts, and I believe that this contribution would help regionally as well. However, this is an exceptional year, and I feel this is something that we can easily take back this year, because those arts organizations of the CRD will probably be able to get additional COVID grants of their own, and they can apply directly to that. And so rather than giving them directly money from our municipality or from our own Restart grant, I'm hoping that they will be able to get money from higher levels of government instead. And then I will go back to Councillor Rintoul.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I find it interesting that our economy operates regionally, and we send money down the Pat Bay Highway to SIP for 5 years, but our regional arts and culture is isolated in a little bubble here in Sydney. It's not. We do a lot for the arts and culture here in Sydney, and no one is suggesting that we should do any less. What I am suggesting is that previously this council referred this matter to the budget process so that we could look to support regional arts, in which members of not just the peninsula but of this community participate regularly, either as providing arts and cultural events through venues in Victoria or as attendees to support those events and to enjoy them. So I think we do have a role in the regional arts beyond our what we do here in the good work we do here in Sydney, which we should not sell short by any stretch. All I'm suggesting is that there was an appetite previously, or we wouldn't be considering this today, for Sydney to fund the CRD Arts voluntarily as a means to show that level of support. And if this motion fails to see the funding come from Safe Restart funding, then someone else can make it to remain as part of our budget and come from somewhere else. That's fine. But I think this is a mechanism and a means to properly address the type of support we're talking about for 2021, and I'll continue to support the motion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Garnett and then to the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Councillor Fallett. I support the $10,000 voluntary contribution to the CRD, but I don't support it through COVID Restart. I would like to see it as an ongoing item in the budget and come from normally tax funded. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm supportive of the motion, whether it's COVID restart or from taxpayer funded. I think my colleagues are aware of my preference in terms of the CRD Arts and Culture Service. I accept my colleagues' decision to support more strongly the Peninsula organization, but I think similar to economics, as Councillor O'Toole has spoken to, regional or economy, that we can support both local and regional, and that the arts ecosystem does not know municipal boundaries. We have Sydney residents who participate in arts organizations throughout the region, and vice versa. And I think our residents benefit from it, and I'm supportive of the motion either way. And would ask the mover to consider amending the motion to be from tax funded versus COVID.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor, well, I'll go to Councillor Fallett first, although you've dropped your hand, so I don't know if you want the mover to address that first, or if you have comments that you would like to bring up first.
Thank you. I was going to speak to the regional fund contribution, not necessarily about where the money is going to come from. So the mayor has just made a amendment, and I think maybe that should be sorted out first.
Thank you. So currently the motion on the floor is for this $10,000 to come from the Safe Restart grant. The mayor has suggested that it instead go from taxpayer funding. It sounded from the conversation that this is more of a matter is going to be whether or not we fund it from taxpayer. There didn't seem to be much of an appetite for the restart, so I'll look to the mover to see if that was an acceptable amendment.
Okay.
No, I'm the mover, so no, let's vote on this and then move on. If someone else wants to move it to come from the general budget fund, that's fine. We don't even have to vote on that. I want to vote on this coming from Safe Restart funding.
Okay. All right. So we've had the discussion. I will call the question on the $10,000 to CRD Arts coming from our Safe Restart. All in favor? I see 2 in favor. Opposed? Okay. Motion fails. We'll go with, did you want to make another motion, Mr. Mayor?
I would move the CRD.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, I turned it off instead of on. I would move that we move the CRD Arts voluntary contribution of $10,000 from taxpayer funded.
Second.
Okay, discussion, Councillor Fallett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what I just wanted to hearken back to the conversation about supporting the regional economic force with SIP, and why not arts in that sense. The difference between the two organizations are, if we went to ongoing art support, as in full Tier 2 membership, we would be in forever. By doing a voluntary amount, we have the choice of how many dollars we send downtown, and also whether or not we do from one given year to another. So that's the one difference between the two systems. With SIP, we can opt out if we choose to do so. I also just want to remind my colleagues that by sending a voluntary amount, it is a signal to downtown that yes, we recognize our obligation, if you will, to the regional arts direct funding as opposed to indirect by supporting our local arts. The difference being, of course, that our arts groups, can't go to the CRD Arts and request grants. And also any arts group that is getting a grant from one of the other member communities cannot perform in Sydney because we aren't a member of the CRD Arts. By sending a voluntary dollar amount, that precludes CRD grant groups attending performing in Sydney, and also our arts groups from accessing those funds. So I just wanted to make sure that we do understand that difference, but it is supporting the concept of putting some money into the regional arts directly. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Garnett, had you had a comment earlier? Yes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question of clarity for Mr. Histic. So this is an item we do need to vote on. It's not something we can just leave and say it's in the budget, just for clarification.
From my perspective, only a motion to remove is required if that's the will of council. Otherwise, it remains in and remains in as tax funded for an ongoing period.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for requesting that clarification. Mr. Mayor, did you want to speak to the motion you have made, or with Mr. Hissik's clarification, would we like to move on?
I think going back to the discussion we had earlier about what we would choose to discuss, I think, council members are raising items of concern, or that we've had discussion. We've had good discussion on this. We didn't know that whether it was going to be unanimous or in favor, and I think it's reasonable to make a motion or continue with the motion. I'm not suggesting we're going to have to address every item. I suggest that if councilor member has a concern about an item remaining in the budget, then we should have a discussion about that. Just a very small clarification on Councillor Fallett with regards to the CRD Arts and Cultural Service. If Sydney was to rejoin, and I realize that's not a consideration Sydney is giving this year, but if we were to rejoin, we have 2 years to withdraw, because Sydney has withdrawn from it. Small point of clarification for future reference. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments, I'll call the question on keeping the CRD Arts voluntary contribution in. Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to say, in a perfect world, if we had a big pot of money, of course it would be great to send them some money. But in a year where we're challenged, we're trying to we're looking for 170 something thousand, and then maybe more after that. I don't know. So that's an issue for me. And also in terms of, supporting our own community. And so if I have a choice to send money somewhere else, I'd like to be able to support more programming for our local people. So that's kind of where I land on it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I think another point of moving forward with this motion is that the motion was for 1 year. And again, we could have had discussion whether this would be ongoing funding and to become a line item until we consider it further. So I would be in favor of it for a longer commitment, but the motion is for 1 year, and I think it's reasonable to have a resolution to that effect.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that clarification. So the motion is to approve, just to make it clear, for the 10,000 from taxpayer funded. I will call the question. All those in favor? I see 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed for the 10,000 this year? The motion passes. Okay, so I see the remaining community support items requiring decision were from Safe Restart Grant, which doesn't move anybody's needle, I think, on the taxpayer funded, unless they wanted to even if they discuss moving more in. So I will go on and go for Mr. Histic for additional supplemental items. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I suggest that if council wishes any supplemental item removed from the budget, that they make a motion accordingly?
Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I did want to talk about the junior arborist position. So are we just having a conversation, or do you think we need to have a motion to start that off?
I think at this point, we would actually need to see if there is an appetite for a motion to remove before we would go for a discussion. Otherwise, we'll just assume we'll go forward with it until next budget meeting.
Okay, so to have the discussion, I'll make the motion that we remove the junior arborist position from the operating budget.
I'll seek a seconder.
I'll second for discussion.
All right. Open for
Okay.
discussion. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Councillor O'Keefe. Yeah.
Thank you. So in looking at this, I know we have our urban forest strategy, and this is a tough one. However, when I look at areas where we're going to cut back, it seemed like one of the biggest areas where we might be able to do that. Areas of concern for me are that this is an ongoing position, so it's increasing our operating expenditures for an ongoing basis. I know that, I looked at, staff sent some excellent information today, sent a really good update, and I thank them for that, about the list of actions from our urban forest strategy. And I look at the number of things that have already been completed, and that's excellent. And I also note the comment that, residents and council expect a high level of service. And in times like this, when we're very challenged to look at curbing expenses, in having been in public sector and government for many years, there was times that we had to start looking at, the level of service that we can provide. And so I look at this and I'm thinking, in a perfect world, it would be great to have this position on an ongoing basis. But I don't know that, whether we want to continue with that high level of service or not, or whether we think that there's potential that we could get by with having, there's a number of things in the strategy that are not necessarily the work of an arborist. There's other things like Tree Appreciation Day that is sort of an event planning thing. Working with the Victoria Green team on different events, a number of things like that. So I guess what I would prefer to see is something where we do what we can, and if it means that it takes a little bit longer to complete what's in the strategy, that's kind of where I'm landing for now. So interested to hear my colleagues' comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I've seen Councillor Garnett and then Councillor Fallett and then the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support this position remaining in. I look at the urban forest strategy. We all agree to a climate emergency. This is part of that, and pandemic aside and cost aside, this plays into our climate strategy and lessening our global impact. And it's pretty important, I think, to show the community that we're really serious about it. And I don't think putting this off does us any good service, because we're the climate emergency isn't going to stop because the pandemic is here. As we slowly come out of, there was an impact shown during the pandemic when everybody was under lockdown. The environment actually started to get better, but that's not going to last forever. And this is something we need to tackle, and it's a priority. And it's not just about providing good service; it's about having that extra body there to make sure that our trees are retained, making sure people follow the rules with regards to the size and what can be cut down and what can't be. And was one person only has two eyes, and he can't be everywhere. So I think it's a valuable service that we're adding with our initiative to help towards climate change in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Fallett, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If I may, through you to staff, and I believe Mr. Robinson is on Zoom, could we get some information regarding what a junior arborist is? Is that number of years of expertise, or is that a level of education that makes one a junior as opposed to a senior? Or is this something that a parks tech could do? Like, help me understand, first of all, what is a junior arborist?
Mr. Robinson, if you would.
Through the chair to Councillor Fallon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, we've basically used the term junior arborist basically to differentiate between a senior position and a junior position. I think when we restructure and create this position, we'll be going with an arborist 1 and an arborist 2, and there'll be the senior position will have a higher level of responsibility and accreditations than what an arborist 1 would have. Again, it's a bit of a succession planning tool. Again, as we plant more trees and we evaluate our inventory, one of the things out of the master plan was exactly how many trees do we have, what trees in our boulevards are reaching end of life, that type of thing, how we're going to strategize to do replantings, deal with our natural areas. It's hand in glove to need that extra expertise, not only to administer the permitting and the education of the public, but every tree we plant in the ground probably takes 2 years of TLC to make sure it establishes itself. So the more we plant based on the significance of what trees mean to the community, I think to have that additional staff person makes sense as well. Our senior position right now, again, is probably within his last 10 to 15 years of work. It's a good succession planning model to roll into. The other thing that's come to light recently is just the severity of our weather. That very first small windstorm that we had earlier this year in December, we saw quite a lot of destruction in the tree canopy that created risk in the community. And unfortunately, it took us a long time to evaluate some of those risks with one expert on staff.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. I appreciate that. So it's a, from what I understand, then it's a blend of actual workload for the arborist themselves, that position itself. It's also succession planning. So this is not a matter of we could have one arborist on staff and spread the work under that supervisory position over to, say, a parks technician, my terminology, but somebody who is basically planting and working on the direction of the arborist. But you're actually saying that the workload of the arborist is such that we require a second person as well as looking at succession planning. Is that, in a nutshell, am I getting it?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor Fallon. The other thing to realize is, to support the Parks Master Plan and the Urban Forest Strategy, both of those documents did say that we needed a higher emphasis on our trees. So in order to do that effectively and to be able to quantify what we're doing, it does make sense for us to add some capacity in that specific area of the work we do within our parks.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Robinson. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Robinson. I'll move to the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of having this position. I think the staff reports, and I think, quite frankly, I think the process our council has gone through over the first couple of years, we've done three very important things. We've approved. Staff have worked very hard to present the Parks Master Plan, which we've approved, the Urban Forest Strategy, which we've approved, and the Tree Preservation Law, which we amended significantly. And in all three discussions, we came to appreciate, with resident participation and advocacy, that trees are more important, to this community. When we had our first Tree Appreciation Day this year, it was our arborist. There was a few dozen people in attendance. We planted 25 or 30 trees, and it was our arborist who told us how to plant. These trees, and as we've heard from Mr. Robinson, these are going to need TLC for the next 2 years, and we have in our budget an ongoing tree planting program. So again, we're going to be paying more attention to trees because we're preserving more trees now under our tree preservation bylaw. So I think there's a clear indication that that trees are important to our community. They've brought that to our attention. We've taken action through Parks Master Plan, Urban Forest Strategy, Tree Preservation Bylaw, and this is a required position. And sorry, I'll add the fourth that Mr. Robinson had. We're having more significant weather events, which has an impact as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question on removal of the junior arborist. All in favor? I see 2 in favor. All opposed? Okay. Motion fails. Mr. Hisik, if you'd like to carry on.
I still leave it in council's court if you'd like to make a motion to remove any other supplemental item or to move on to a different part of the budget.
Oh, I see. I'm going to with Councillor Fallett first and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you very much. So under supplemental requests, under one-time requests, we've got the BC 150 celebrations for $5,000. This was something that I initiated a couple of years ago before we ever thought about COVID and the impacts of COVID. So if I may ask, first of all, through to staff, have we had any indication from the province that there's anything happening for BC 150? Are they looking at any sort of celebration or method to mark the occasion?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not aware of any communication with or from the province related to this matter. If it is approved, then we would initiate those. If not, then it'll be a moot point.
Okay, so given the circumstances, I know it's a small budget item, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to make a big difference. But I think given COVID and the restrictions and that we haven't really heard anything from the province about 150, I would like to move that we remove the BC 150 celebrations off the budget for 21.
Second.
I'm actually just going to see if Councillor O'Keefe wanted to have a comment first. You'll get the first discussion.
That's okay. Carry on.
Okay. I'll open it up for discussion to somebody else to comment on the motion on the floor. Oh, Councillor O'Keefe.
Actually, what I had been pondering on that one is that and maybe it's going to be a moot point now if we're going to just take it out of the budget. But the SBIA handles events for us. And when I had taken on the liaison role, whenever that was a couple years ago, so we had discussions about the types of events that the SBIA does on our behalf. And so we had looked at the list that had come with the original MOU. And some of those things are things that they no longer do just because they don't get run anymore. So for example, they had, I think, $5,000 allocated for the comic book event that we did. They also used to look after the Lego exhibit, and but that was something that the museum ended up taking on. So at that time, what they had talked about was having a discussion with us about other things that we might want to add to that list in lieu of those. So I was just going to suggest, if we decided that we were going to keep it, that we could perhaps suggest that that's something that the SBIA could do under their event coordination. But I'm just as happy to take it out completely. Thanks.
Mr. Hisik wanted to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a reminder that Peninsula Celebrations also does events on behalf of the town. They have foregone their budget request for this year because of circumstances. We did give them their traditional $12,000 last year, but perhaps they could be contacted as well to plan something within existing funds.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Or shall I call a question on removal of the BC 150 celebrations? Or would the mover like to comment on Mr. Hisik's suggestion?
Thank you. From my perspective, when I was looking at the BC 150, it had less to do with a party only and more that we did something in the town to mark the event, as in maybe some place names that were changed or whatever. But I think right now there's so much else that's going on that we have to do, that to concentrate on this in honor of BC 150 is really not someplace we need to spend any time and energy. And I think if there are organizations such as CAG and Peninsula Celebrations itself that want to put on an event to mark that, then they'll do it within the fullness of their scope. So I'm not too worried about it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. That actually clarified for me the purpose of that item and what that was intended for. So I will now call the question on the removal. All in favor? I see unanimous. So we will go on. Does anyone have another supplemental item to suggest? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm just sorry, perhaps Mr. Hissack could help me, remind me where we put the, and maybe it's I don't know if it's a supplemental item or if it's in the capital, but we had talked about $30,000 related to pickleball courts. Is that underneath the others category, or?
That is in the capital program as a 30,000 item, and as covered in the staff report, the only decision that needs to be made tonight is whether you want to keep that in the budget to allow for the possibility of further exploring it. And if it did remain, then we would report back about an approach on how we might get that accomplished. So it'll be covered when we move to the tax-funded capital.
Okay, so I won't bring that up now then. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Looking for any, okay, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one is a question regarding one of the supplemental items, the Beacon Wharf Consulting, the additional 100,000, and the binder is showing that as being funded from the amenity reserve. And I guess I can see that Beacon Wharf can be considered an amenity for the community. But one of the options that we'd be investigating with that 100,000 is removing it. And to use amenity funds to remove an amenity doesn't really seem like a good fit.
Thank you, Councillor. You're right, it is amenity funded, and it's funded in that manner to allow for a full investigation of options. We wouldn't be using the funding to remove it, just to come to a decision on its future. So it might be a bit of a stretch, but honestly, we try very hard to come in with a budget that minimizes tax impacts, and this is yet another example.
Councillor?
I'm not making a motion. I'm simply making that observation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, and thank you for Councillor Wainwright for bringing that up, because that was something that I had kind of put a question mark around, and I'm just looking through my notes here, but I remember when I was looking through some previous, I don't know if it was quarterly or reports or whatever, there was a different reserve fund that was identified when we were talking about the Beacon Wharf. It wasn't the amenity fund that it was coming from. It was coming from something else, but I can't remember what that was.
That is correct, Councillor, but there's no more money left in that other reserve to fund this.
Okay, good. Okay, well, that explains that. Thank you.
Right. So I think we've gone through all of the supplementals that Mr. Hissack requested comment on. So if somebody else had a oh, sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, just turned paper. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
If colleagues have no other items to consider under the general operating and supplemental items. I have a preference for waiting until our next meeting on March at the beginning of March to approve the general operating budget. I think hearing some of the discussion tonight in terms of the tax level we may be trying to achieve, I would like to take the time over the next 2 weeks to give further consideration to the general operating budget. And again, if colleagues don't have anything else, I'm prepared to go to the capital budget.
Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. This is actually supplemental request, but it's in 2023, and the trolley service consultant. And I guess I was just going to propose that we just completely take that off the menu. And the reason I recall this originally came up, and perhaps Councillor Wainwright, I think, was more involved with EDC years ago, but in rereading the reports from 2018 and 19, my understanding was this came up through the EDC as a proposal when the Gateway project was under consideration. And there was discussion about it would be a good idea to have a trolley service that went between the town and Gateway and perhaps to some of those industrial areas. And we've kind of kept it on the books, and I'm just thinking of taking it off more as a housekeeping thing. It seems to me that we're better to focus time on petitioning and working with BC Transit to get better service out in those areas. I understand there's transit studies underway, so unless there's a good reason to keep this in here, I would just say let's take it out so we don't have to look at it again.
Second. If that's a motion, I'll second it.
Yeah, sure, that's it.
Okay, discussion. Councillor Wainwright.
I have to say that really did not seem like a very good explanation of, and it didn't come out of the EDC.
Okay.
So yes, it was initially raised in the context of Gateway, but one of the significant issues for our West Industrial area is the linkage to the downtown and their ability for employees to get into downtown, use our services and shops and such, and get back to their place of employment within a reasonable time frame. And yeah, it's quite possible that we could lobby and eventually BC Transit will do something about it. But this was actually quite well received by the West Sydney industrial community. So to just casually, I don't want to hear it about it anymore, it's related to Gateway and we don't need it, I think that's probably not giving it fair consideration. But this is like several years down the road. This isn't even this council. It's a future council dealing with it. So I mean, I don't think this is a productive use of our time.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I'll speak for the first time that I was going to say what Councillor Wainwright did. This isn't our council. We have a lot to consider over the next couple budget nights, so I'd like to keep the discussion on this one pretty short, and we'll just move on to a vote on that. Councillor O'Keefe, if I saw your hand up there.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Let's just thank you to Councillor Wainwright for sort of providing that broader perspective. So I'm happy to vote against my own motion.
You could always withdraw your motion if you'd like.
Yeah, you know what? I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, seconder. Who is the seconder? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and the mayor had previously mentioned he would like to go forward with the general operating into the next budget discussion. So it sounds like we've reached the end of our supplementals. If Mr. Hissick would like to continue with the capital budget discussion, and then we'll go on with our discussion after that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before moving on to the capital budget, I just want to clarify that I'm going to take all of the motions approved tonight, as well as some additional ideas that have come up in my mind throughout the discussion, and report back to the next meeting with potentially other tax reduction measures in addition to the motions that are made. So don't feel compelled to try and get down to that $170,000 figure all at once. I think there's enough ammunition now to come back with more options for next time in addition to what's already been approved. Having said that, moving on to the capital budget, quick reminder that we have $9.6 million in the capital budget for 2021, with $6 million of that being asset replacement projects, another $1.8 million in projects carried forward for completion, and roughly $1.5 in what I would term as new projects. And only a tiny portion of that is funded from taxes, less than $300,000, with the vast majority of it coming from reserves, and the next highest source is gas tax. So in anticipation of wanting to not only look at the new items, but the new items that are tax funded, I have included those in the staff report, and I'm reproducing them here for just highlighting them as potential discussion points, as I did with supplementals. So that is the only introduction I have, and if there are any questions or comments about the capital program, that would be the time.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. Councillor Wainwright, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I can anticipate there's some interest in this one, but the town fitness room equipment replacement, and you've got that listed in the category of annual recurring projects. So I'm assuming that we're doing fitness room equipment replacement on some kind of regular schedule. Can I ask, what is the total capital value of fitness room equipment? Like, is $5,000 replacing 10% of it? Is it replacing 50% of it? Is it adding new equipment and instead of something that is currently there? I'm just wondering, what the recurring amount or how that recurring amount relates to the total value of the fitness room equipment.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm afraid I don't have a very good answer for this. So if there's any other staff member that would like to weigh in at this time, that would be appreciated.
Go ahead, Mr. Hissick. Or sorry, Mr. Humble.
Yeah, just as one of the regular users of the fitness room facility, so I know one of the piece of equipment that's slated for replacement this year is the treadmill, and it's one of the more expensive pieces of equipment. I would say, so I believe the $5,000 is going towards that particular piece of equipment. I would say total cost of equipment within the fitness room is probably in the ballpark of maybe, I would guess, around $25,000 to $30,000 total would be the total amount.
Thank you. I remember having a discussion about this. I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, that there were 2 years in the proposed budget with a $5,000 price tag. And so my recollection is that this was the second year, and that it was a $5,000 last year and then $5,000 this year for a total of $10,000. But maybe Mr. Hissett can check that one and see if that's why that ended up that way, and this isn't actually like a third year that's carrying through and a really annual. Mr. Hummel, go ahead.
Yeah, last year I believe the 5,000 was spent on a new stationary bike. So that was a new piece of equipment last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what I'm just saying is it wasn't a replacement. It was that we'd had 2 years in that 5-year plan where we knew that 5,000 was coming up, and this was the second year. So I guess that was just addressing that, instead of that every year we say we're going to spend $5,000 on it. But that was just, yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Hissett.
If Mr. Humble's estimate of total value is correct, we're talking about a replacement cycle of once every 5 to 6 years. If council is not comfortable with the annual amount of 5,000, but you're willing to allocate a lower amount, then we will certainly do our best to work within that.
Councillor Wainwright, I thought I saw your hand again. Did you have a response?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I think Mr. Hissett's comments have answered what I was looking for there. I can certainly appreciate that expenditures in a particular year might be large. So, you know, if you think about our fire vehicle replacement, every once in a while they have to replace one of the big ticket items, and it's a really noticeable thing. But there is an annual replacement amount going into a reserve to kind of level it out. And what I was kind of aiming at on this one was, is this in fact the big ticket item being replaced? And I'm hearing it is, but I'm also hearing that that is roughly the amount that staff think would be necessary if we were going to replace the existing equipment inventory on something like a 5-6 year schedule. So having heard that, I'm not going to make any motion. It sounds like this is addressed appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Not a question. I was actually just gonna, I know it's not a large amount of money, but I was thinking in terms of deferring that item as well as the town hall staff bicycle. The rationale behind that is not that I don't deem them important. I just think that given what we're going through and given the financial difficulties people in our community and businesses are facing, it just seems like an expenditure that seems not excessive, but something that's really not necessary, given the parameters we're in. And I think it's something we can kick down the road, so to speak, a year or two from now, because it just for me, it's troublesome, given what I know people are going through in the community, to be spending money on fitness equipment or a town hall bike, which are not necessities in my book. So I would prefer to see them deferred. Thank you.
Councillor Wainwright and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can appreciate my colleagues' comments about the fitness equipment, but when I was reading the description about the town hall staff bicycle, I'm seeing that to be used as transportation, not for fitness, and it avoids our staff having to use a vehicle. So it's climate action positive, and by using a bicycle instead of the vehicle, they're extending the life of the vehicle too. So I think for $1,200, that one actually is making a lot of economic sense. The sooner we get them using active transportation as opposed to vehicles, the faster that is going to return on investment. But I understand my colleagues' arguments about the fitness equipment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe. Mr. Humble would like to comment first.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just one comment on the fitness equipment. It's important to note too that the one piece of equipment that is being replaced is, as I pointed out, the treadmill, which I have to say is on the last legs. Like it is the tread is pretty much ready to go. In fact, it's at the point right now where it's probably almost dangerous to use. I should also point out that the fitness room is not utilized just by municipal employees, but also RCMP detachment members as well. It's a well-used facility.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll go to Councillor O'Keefe then. And
Thanks. Just Mr. Humble just made me think of something. Is there a fitness facility at the fire hall? And I recall us talking about this, and was there ability for town staff and RCMP to use the fitness facilities at the CSB?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, indeed there is a fitness facility at the CSB. It is used primarily or strictly by volunteer members as well as the paid staff. But maybe I'll let Chief Mickelson, if he's there, speak to the challenges around other users.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Yes, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, the fitness facility was designed and constructed strictly around our cohort of firefighters. And it was partially funded by equipment or funds arising from wildfire donations, or not donations, but money generated from provincial wildfire deployments. So it's something that our group of volunteers kind of hold and maintain and kind of keep fairly close, a close guard on, for lack of a better term. We do share it with, in non-COVID times, with our friends at the BC Ambulance Service. But other than that, I think we would be exceeding a reasonable capacity if we open it up beyond that.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess I'm just going to comment on Councillor Garnett's comments. I tend to agree with him in terms of the $5,000 amount. It's not a huge amount, but knowing that the degree of suffering, if you want to call it that, in the community, with especially with our businesses, it's hard for me to justify $5,000 for a new treadmill for town staff. And just some of the people, not to be flippant, but I know people that have responded will say, well, take a walk around the block or go for a run, and I'm fine with the bicycle. I think that's a good idea. As Councillor Wainwright mentioned, I also saw that as something that would be used to going to appointments, and that seems to make sense if we're not going to be using a vehicle. So I'm fine with that, but not as fine with the $5,000 for a fitness room equipment replacement.
I'll go with the mayor and then Councillor Rintoul.
If I could ask if we could have a motion on the floor if we're going to continue discussion on this item. We don't have a motion on the floor as it stands.
Okay, I'll move that we remove $5,000 for town fitness room equipment replacement.
Second.
Discussion? Any further discussion, rather? Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
I'll speak briefly to it. Employee fitness is important. I know it's of value to the town employees, both here in the hall and the RCMP detachment. There are 2 treadmills, and this treadmill, from personal experience, is very much on its last legs, and I think pretty much unused at this point.
Mr. Hummel, go ahead.
Just through yourself to the mayor, there's actually just 1 treadmill remaining. So there's only 1 treadmill in the fitness room currently.
So there was 2, so the one has had to be removed.
Correct.
Because of end of life.
Correct.
So this 5,000 would
just to replace just the 1.
Would replace the single treadmill.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm even more in favor of it. Thank you.
Okay, I had Mayor, Councillor Rintoul, and then Councillor O'Keefe.
No, I'm happy the motion is before us and I support it.
Okay. Councillor O'Keefe, did you wish to speak to it again?
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention, in times when Panorama was operating, I would be up there at lunchtime, and I've bumped into staff members that go up to Panorama. They take a little bit of, I don't know if they combine their coffee and their lunch break to go up there to go for a swim or to take advantage of the facilities there. So I'm wondering, if a better investment is providing staff with a reduced, a fitness pass or something, but it seems like there's other options available than having our own fitness room. Thanks.
All right, thanks. I'll just speak to it before calling the question. Since it's only $5,000, I understand Council's desire to remove it for optics, essentially, based on the condition of the businesses, but it's not going to get them anything. For $5,000, we're not going to be able to provide any additional services, move any money. We're looking at such a large piece of money to remove to get down to the tax decrease or the lowered tax increase that Council is looking for. I feel it's just, it might look like something, but I don't feel that it's quite going to be worth it, considering that if staff are going to go elsewhere to exercise, they're probably going to take that time out of their day. And I feel that the RCMP and staff, if they're using this equipment and it's very well used, it might be helping us with our productivity for those members. So I'm going to go ahead and call Councillor Garnett wants to speak again. Go
I just
ahead.
want to clarify, for me, it's not about the optics. For me, I think it's just the morally responsible thing to do.
All right, I'll go ahead and call the question on the removal of the $5,000 for town fitness equipment. All in favor? See 3 in favor. I'm going to say opposed. Okay. Motion fails. Does anyone have further motions to make? Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to speak further to the bike. I understand the issue around the environmental impact, and I'm all for all of that. My only concern is that it's a replacement of a bike that I've never seen used. So I want to make sure if we're spending $1,200 during these times of taxpayer money, that it's actually going to be used, as is indicated in the report. Otherwise, we're purchasing something that's just going to sit there and collect dust.
Sorry, Mr. Hissick, can you clarify for me that it's...
There's no guarantee it'll be used. The first time we purchased a bicycle, it was at the request of one specific employee who used it for a while but has since left us. And it wasn't really suitable for larger sized employees. So that's what we're hoping to get here. And again, it's at the request of one specific individual, but we are hoping that if it's here and it's more suitable for a wider range of people, that it will be used, and we'll certainly be encouraging that use.
Yes. Mr. Hissick, can you clarify, is this is just a standard bicycle, not an electric bike, or is this an electric bike?
Just standard.
Okay. Councillor Garnett, would you like to actually make a motion? Carrying on, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like a question through to staff with regards to capital line item 120 parks vehicles. We have 195,000 in the 2021 budget. I know from questions in previous years that sometimes that is a number of vehicles, sometimes it's a significant vehicle being replaced, but my question is more around are EV vehicles still being considered by staff moving forward? I appreciate answers in previous years have been changing technology, and I'm just wondering where we might be at in consideration at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll defer to Mr. Robinson on this. We did purchase one electric vehicle last year, which seems to have been well received, and I think we're considering more, but I'll let Mr. Robinson provide a more precise response.
Yeah, through the chair to the mayor, this year's requests are for 3 vehicles. 2 of them were carry forwards from last year. One of the vehicles has subsequently been purchased. It's a new vehicle for the arborist with a chip box and a utility The other two are service trucks for one of our gardeners and our irrigation specialist. So there was, I believe there's 90,000 in the budget for those two vehicles. One of them definitely is a consideration of a small electric vehicle with a dump box on it. We did some demonstrations last year and are probably going to go out for quotations within the next 6 weeks to look at replacing one of those units with an electric.
Thank you very much. I have a supplemental question, or another question. It's not a supplemental to that. Line 89 in the capital budget is infrastructure plan projects from 2022 to 2025. I know we've had Kenora Road in the plan for a number of years. I'm wondering, is Kenora Road, I know which includes underground and surface, both roadway and sidewalk, is that within the 2022 to 25 budget?
Because of the reprioritization according to the pavement condition assessments, I believe it is no longer in the 5-year horizon, and I'll let Ms. Clary confirm.
Thank you. Yes, that is correct. It's been moved out a few years, I believe to 2029, and that is due to just increasing costs of the project and other competing priorities and the condition assessment, pavement condition assessment that was done.
Thank you. I do have a supplemental, Madam Chair, and appreciating that answer. Thank you. Is it possible to move forward in some fashion with a sidewalk, or do the other improvements have to be made for a sidewalk to be constructed?
It's really better to do the whole road as a unit, but I can refer that to Bruce tomorrow, who's more involved in the design of that project.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Very similar to the exercise we went through with Gallaram Road, where we were looking at trying to get a sidewalk in place prior to road improvements. We have the same challenges on Kenora, where we, to get the infrastructure and where you're trying to get the curb and the road reprofiled to try to match with sidewalk grades becomes very challenging. And it's much more efficient to do it all as one scope of project. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I would certainly like to see a sidewalk there, but I appreciate when you're talking about large infrastructure projects, that has to be a consideration. So thank you to staff. I do have another question, and it is Gallarin. And I see Gallarin, I don't have it immediately before me, but when reading previously, I believe it's 2023. We did have a public open house a couple of years ago, and we did postpone it after engagement with the community. Was it 2023 that we placed then, or is that changed? I seem to recall 2022, but if staff could speak to that, please.
It was 2023, so we are planning to live up to that commitment.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor O'Keefe and then Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm back to the bike again. Thank you to Councillor Garnett for asking those additional questions. So I'll move that we remove from the budget the $1,200 for town hall staff bicycle.
Second.
Discussion?
I guess for me on that, you know, having the additional information that this was something that was for one employee in the past, it didn't sound like it was well used. It's being proposed for one employee again. It doesn't, I had assumed that this was part of maybe some new sort of program to reduce, use of our vehicles, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. So if it's just for one person who would like to use this, I find that even though it's a small expenditure, don't feel right funding that. So that's my pitch for that one.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
I won't support the motion. I think we've heard from staff that the current bicycle is inadequate. And I think, given our climate change objectives, I think you want to incent change of behavior. And I think for this rather modest expenditure, that while one employee is committed to using a bicycle, that there would be future opportunities to have others. And
Thank you. I'll take my opportunity to speak. I'm torn on this. Again, it's a very small amount of money that, as the mayor says, we could actually spin into more of an incentive, giving on our climate change commitments. The thing that gives me pause is that it is not an e-bike, and I'm thinking of the CRD's program when they started buying bicycles to have people who did inspections get around. They did that, and that was very well received. It allowed them to go faster. They didn't end up, breaking a sweat. And so I'm almost wondering if this bike might be, if we're looking at that kind of program where we're going to try and get those staff who can actually do some of their job, if they have to be moving around town, to be able to do that, and if that would actually incent some of our employees to get out and reduce the amount that our vehicles are being used, and save some of that cost there, I would appreciate that. So I'm almost wanting to say to go with removing this one now, and hoping that staff will hear that for future discussions about actually whether a capital purchase plan for bicycles is something that we can do with what the duties staff have. So go ahead, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question through to staff. The individual who would be using the bike is in which department?
Bylaw enforcement.
My understanding is that the bylaw officer, generally when I see that person out and about, drives an electric vehicle every time I've seen them. So there's already less environmental impact, if that's the case, is there not? I mean, that's the vehicle. I only ever see the person in an electric vehicle, so the town electric vehicle, not in anything else. So from an environmental perspective, there's not really much of a trade-off for me, so thanks.
Well, a bike will have a much lower environmental impact, but I guess it all comes down to whether or not it was being used. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and call the question on this one about all in favor of removing the town bicycle.
Can I just speak to it before you call the question?
Go ahead. I keep missing you. I'm sorry, Barbara.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I think when I hear staff say that we're hoping it will be used and whatnot, that's not good enough for me at this point. I love the idea. I think it's the right way to go and all of that, but I think there needs to be a little bit more surety from staff. There needs to be surety from staff that this is a product that is going to be used. I think we need to have a program for this. I also want to make sure that when we're looking at making this purchase, that this is an all-in. That means if there's going to be helmets, are we expecting our employees to provide their own helmets, or are we providing a helmet? So that needs to be put into that. And if we're looking at, are they going to be using this bike even if it rains, then what happens to rain gear? I would like this to be a complete package, so I would agree with your comments, Madam Chair. I think turn it down at this point, and I think we need to take a look at it a little bit more fulsome. So thank you very much.
Go ahead, Councillor Wainwright. Thank you.
Actually, I was noting that Ms. Clary had her hand up earlier, and I think had some information for us on this.
Thank you. Ms. Clary, did you still have a comment?
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright, through you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify that the bylaw enforcement officer does use both the electric Leaf and the hybrid Escape, and for the most part is currently driving the hybrid Escape. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. All right, further discussion? All right, I'll call the question on removal of the bike from the budget. All in favor? Opposed? Let's see, 1, 2, 3. So it looked like the bike was removed. We had 4. sorry. Yeah. All right. Did anyone have further motion? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rintoul, I think that was. Then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to staff, Rotary Park chain link fence. This is tax-funded capital budget. I recognize it's a carry forward. I think it's been a carry forward for a couple of years now, but I would like staff to refresh our memory somewhat on this. Does this, I know the reference here in the PowerPoint presentation is to chain link fence. I can't dig it up right now. I don't have the page number, but in the capital project summary, I think there was actually a reference to irrigation as part of this as well. So I want a clarification. Is this $18,700 on the fence? If so, where is the fence? Because I know the airport has its own fence, which is well maintained to delineate airside from the park. And what is the town's obligation versus PBSA, Peninsula Baseball and Softball Association, and North Saanich as a partner here, if that can be clarified. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The Rotary Park irrigation is a separate project, and I'll let Mr. Robinson discuss the fencing.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul. Basically, what we've done is a risk assessment over the years. Most of the existing chain link fence at the park is original to the facility, 1992 vintage. So what we're starting to see is a lot of curl at the bottom of the fence. And we've been systematically replacing bits and pieces of the fence as we go along. We did a bit of a phased approach last year for the taller fences. And now the fences that we're looking at is the short 4-foot sections between a couple of field diamonds. The plan for this year is we've looked around what other municipalities are doing in their recreation ball fields, is they're now providing an extruded concrete curb at the bottom of the fence line, putting in the new chain link fence. And what they're finding is they're not getting that curl anymore. It limits the need to use pesticides to keep the grass from growing up amongst the fence lines. So that's the inference on what we want to do as we continue forward with that. And certainly it's a cost share with the District of North Saanich, so it's double the amount that you see right now to try and be proactive on the fence lines. So in summary, we're just trying to bring it up to a standard, replace some of the existing fencing that has been there since the inception of the field.
And so to clarify, if I could, Mr. Robinson, there's a lot of 4-foot fencing between the diamonds, the various diamonds there. Is this going to do 50% of the park, all of the park? What's the intent?
Yeah, the intent is to do 2 diamonds at this particular point in time, the 2 that are in the most severe condition. Again, as the age of the users get up a little bit higher, some of the risk gets a little bit more to deal with that. So some of the smaller fields are not being done at this particular point in time. And we were going to reassess those at a future date.
And would I, through the chair, and perhaps this is a question for Mr. Hissick, I don't know. I understand the arrangement there. It's airport property. It's leased for a nominal amount. And it's used by Peninsula Baseball and Softball Association. I guess under that agreement with PBSA, it's the town and the District of North Saanich's responsibility to maintain those fence lines, and as such, we potentially would be liable if there were an accident or incident in relation to the fencing. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, the way the agreement reads is any new capital expenditure, such as the original construction of the facility, any new amenities that they're at is all funded through the Baseball Association. And then the town and the district cost share in the routine upkeep and maintenance on those facilities once they're put into place.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I had Councillor O'Keefe again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wanted to go now to Breather Park detailed park design and pickleball courts for 30,000, please. Some questions for staff on that. So I'm not sure whether that's one thing or two things. So when they talk about Breather Park detailed park design and pickleball courts, are they talking about pickleball courts at Breather Park, or are they talking about we're going to do a detailed park design for Breather Park, and separate and apart from that, we're going to do something with pickleball courts? So just looking for a bit of clarity on what the plan is for those funds.
Thank you, Councillor. This is very much centered on pickleball more than it is Breather Park. I'll let Ms. Clary clarify even further.
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor O'Keefe. Yes, the idea was a lot of discussion has happened on pickleball since this budget item was first introduced, but it was still to look at Breather Park and have a detailed design, including washrooms and parking. However, it could go to other parks if we might not need as much. As was discussed in the last council meeting, we may not require, or we might not use as much of the budget on the initial engagement for the pickleball courts, and then bring it back to council after that time.
If I could ask a follow-up to that. So I can't remember what else was planned for Breather Park. I'm very supportive of moving forward to do something for Breather Park for people in that on the west side, but it didn't seem, based on the staff report that we had received about pickleball courts, that Breather Park was going to be a good fit for that. So I guess my question is, setting aside the pickleball courts for a second, are there other improvements or plans that we were going to had hoped to move forward with Breather Park, aside from pickleball?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, there is other improvements. However, this budget item, really Breather Park should technically be removed from it based on council's feedback. It's more related to pickleball. Future budget items will be brought forward for design of specifically Breather Park if the pickleball courts are not really located there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. That clarifies. So I guess for the point to move things along, I will move then that the $30,000 for Breather Park detailed park design and pickleball courts be removed from the budget.
Okay, I'm actually just going to, Councillor Fallett had her hand up for a while there, so I don't know if she wanted to.
Okay. Well, I'll second that motion,
okay,
and then I'll speak.
All right, then we'll move to discussion. And Councillor Rintoul had a hand remaining up there.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, Ms. Clary is correct. This was obviously prepared and referenced prior to our last council meeting. We removed the reference to Breather Park. Nothing to do with it. We also talked about getting away from the expression of detailed park design, and it was meant to be, a site plan. But incumbent on that is the engagement, the public engagement around the location for pickleball courts. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice by throwing this out right now, because I think the consensus was, the last time we discussed this, we want to have money in the budget to have that discussion around a location for pickleball courts. And we've already asked staff and the Pickleball Association to provide us some feedback on how they can help mitigate disturbance for pickleball play and residents, depending on the location. I think $30,000 is too much. I know Mr. Hissick commented that a site plan and consultation could be done for less. I'd be prepared to see this figure go down to about $15,000, but I don't support removing it or its reference from the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to the mayor first and then Councillor O'Keefe again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not I'm opposed to removing this from the budget. I think there was clarity from our last discussion that this is not just Brethra Park. It's putting $30,000 in the budget in 2021, and the next step of the process, if we approve, if we leave that in the budget, is that staff will engage the Saanich Peninsula Pickleball Association on two items. One is mitigation factors, the other is funding, and that staff will then bring back an engagement proposal, if I can call it that, which will include one or more locations, and that council will improve that engagement package to go out with a site design, with a site plan, not detailed design, but that if through the engagement process a location is supported in the community and then supported by council, it would be in the budget to move to detailed design with the majority of the 30,000, and we see the 250,000 in 2022 as a placeholder if we were to construct courts. So I just wanted to clarify what I think is the process and the reason that I'm not supportive of removing it from the budget.
So I had Councillor O'Keefe followed by Councillor Fallick.
Thank you. So the reason I'm continue to be opposed for this is a number of reasons. So first of all, we asked staff to go out and look for suitable locations for pickleball in our community. And there really wasn't any good place. There was either issues with there's not enough parking, too close to residential areas, too windy down at Talista, and the pickleballers didn't like it there anyways. So what I got from the staff report was they actually wanted us to take it out of the budget or to take it out as an item to follow up on, and leaving it to the Pickleball Association to come up with mitigation measures. So my understanding from that is staff had done what we asked them to do. It didn't seem that there would be a location within Sydney. And so to me, it doesn't make sense to go out and try and do more public engagement because I don't see where another park is going to appear from. The other thing that concerns me is that, we've already identified and members of council have expressed concern about the ambitious capital projects that we have on our plate. So again, I worry about something like this, which wasn't really a high priority identified in our strategic plan in the scheme of other things. So I worry about pulling staff away to spend even more time on this, where it just doesn't seem that it's going to be a fit for Sydney. So yeah, I think we need to at some point realize that it's just not going to fit here. So it doesn't make sense to me to put any more time or money into it. I would rather see, if we were going to spend $15,000 or $30,000, put that into Brethra Park, and whether it means putting picnic tables there, do some landscaping there. That's what I would rather see money spent. Thank you.
Councillor Fallick, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm in a real quandary with pickleball. I'm very, very supportive of the sport and the players who want to see facilities happen in Sydney. And but coming up to the last meeting and then reading the staff report, it felt to me like finding a place within the boundaries of Sydney was for a pickleball court was like getting a square peg into a round hole. Everywhere we went, it was either an issue of space, or more importantly, it was also impact on the surrounding neighborhood. And as Councillor O'Keefe said the last time, Sydney isn't growing any more land. There is no more land. So I started to think about it last week, and I thought, what if we put it in an area that it wasn't an issue for residential neighbors? And I thought about speaking to our neighbors to the west, and in particular, I was thinking about the airport and whether or not they had any space. I had sort of thought about Rotary Park and doing it next to Rotary Park. That's just something that I had thought about as I'm walking past. I'm not suggesting that that is the best location, but I wonder if there's an appetite for the airport on some of its land. Would they be willing to donate something? And then we could look at how that would be funded between ourselves and maybe North Saanich or whatever. But that would then take away that whole issue of how does it impact the residential neighborhoods, and it would still be within proximity to Sydney. I don't think a municipality can be everything to everybody, no matter how hard it tries. But that's a whole other discussion. So I'm willing to take this out of the budget right now because I don't think we've explored all the options about where we could possibly put it. I don't think it has to be, and it can be within one of our parks in Sydney. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fowlett. I concur. I moved this one forward when we discussed it previously, thinking that if we did nothing about it, speaking of things that we'll keep hearing about, I'm also concerned that the more we defer it, it sounds like they'll continue using the tennis courts, and that would be a problem. There's something we can't just ignore. So, however, we've received emails saying that for additional funding and granting opportunities, the deadline is rapidly approaching. It doesn't sound like they would make it, and that was one of our prerequisites, was that they were going to need to seek other funders. So I don't see the point in moving forward with it this year, considering that we didn't have an easy place to go forward with it. We have other options for consultation. I would be in favor of deferring this one as well. Oh, Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, this is becoming difficult. And of course, Council might remember I made another suggestion at the last meeting about potentially doing things differently with the tennis courts and the existing tennis courts, changing them and moving tennis courts to Breathar, which is a whole other discussion, as Councillor Fowlett mentioned. I understand there's issues around airport land in North Saanich, and of course there's also the possibility of the land of where a gateway was to go in, which is actually is Sydney, not North Saanich, so that would alleviate that concern. But I do think we need to move forward on this. This has been an ongoing issue for several years now. These people have been more than patient, I think, and this is at least the second council now. They've been waiting for some kind of resolve with this and providing some kind of area for them to play. And I still think there are options we can explore, and working with them, I think we put our heads together, we can come up with something. But to just dismiss it and not have money there to look into it forward sends a really bad message to these people who have been waiting for some kind of decision. And I don't think just out and out. I think if we cancel this funding, there's a potential this may never happen. And it's going to be another issue they're going to bring to the next council. And rightly so, because we want to have active participants and people who are physically active in the community. It's good for health, physical well-being, all of those things. And this is something that's a growing sport. Granted, it's a few hundred people at this point in time, but it's growing rapidly. And to not have facilities for people to play a sport that is popular, it just seems like it's too dismissive to me. So I'd love to see this or some total in here, but as to the mayor's discussion about making sure there's extra for what goes next, I think is an important avenue to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you. I had the mayor next, and so the motion on the floor was removal entirely. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you to Councillor Garnett. I concur with everything you've just said. One thing I'm disappointed in is that we've passed judgment on Tallista Park, and I requested information from staff several days ago, and it wasn't circulated to all of council. The response that came back from staff, because quite frankly, I didn't think we'd be talking about locations for pickleball tonight. But my request was what the square footage of pickleball in Tallista Park would be if it was adjacent to the current skateboard park, and how much space would be remaining between the pickleball courts south to the volleyball court and the playground. And Ms. Clary, you provided the information, and please correct me if I'm not remembering it, but it's 17,000 square feet of space would be left, green space would be left in Tallista Park between a two-court pickleball court and the volleyball court. I do not see how noise from two courts in Tallista Park is going to be a concern given where the residents are located in proximity to that park and Lochside Drive. In terms of the comment about parking, the number of players who will play on two courts are not going to make a significant difference in the parking load at Tallista Park. So again, I don't want to pass judgment on a particular location. I think while we're putting $30,000 in the budget, or considering putting $30,000 in the budget, it is going to be but a couple or $3,000. We already basically have a site plan for staff to bring a proposal back to council in terms of how we will engage. I don't think there's a lot of staff time involved. I don't think there's a lot of cost involved. We will only spend the remaining $30,000 on detailed design if we get favorable public engagement and it comes back to council and we move forward. Thank you.
I believe there was a bit of a question there through to Ms. Clary, if Ms. Clary had clarification she wanted to supply to the mayor's point.
Yes, through the chair to the mayor, that's approximately right. It was over 18,000 square feet.
Thank you.
All right, I feel we've gone into the weeds of discussing the locations of this again, when this was just the item of whether we want to have $30,000 for having any design, further discussion, further staff time put towards going forward with the pickleball courts this year. I'm hoping if we say we remove it this year, staff has heard there's still interest and we'll put it in next year. So if there's no further, or in future years, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I want to make one more point, which I think Councillor Garnett alluded to. There is a significant number of pickleball players on the peninsula and a significant number of players in Sydney. They have 4 outdoor courts on the peninsula. They have some painted lines on tennis courts in the one court in Sydney and 1 tennis court in Central Saanich. The Wayne Road facilities are being overrun, having followed the discussion that is going there. There is the demand for pickleball, and I think we can consider it further with public engagement.
Oh, I see. Thank you. I saw Barbara that time. Go ahead, Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. I don't disagree that there is interest and demand for pickleball. I do not believe our parks, and I would not be in favor of Tallista. I think we shouldn't put it in there. I also remember hearing that our pickleball players were saying that they wanted multiple courts and they were talking about tournaments.
Councillor
and I
Fallett,
think if we're
may I just
okay, I just want to quickly finish.
Okay.
The only reason I want to take it off of the agenda now is because we're still looking at a park in Sydney, and that is what I disagree with. I don't think we have space in our parks. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Did anyone have further motivation, demotivation about funding pickleball court study this year? All right, seeing none, I will call the question. Sorry, this was to remove it, On removal of the $30,000 this year, all in favor? I see two, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Follett. Those opposed to removal of the money this year? I see three, oh, and Councillor Wainwright as well. Okay. Motion fails. Did anybody have another capital item that they wanted to discuss removing, or were we going to go and carry on to the next budget discussion? Go ahead, Councillor. Mr. Hissick. Oh,
Madam
no.
Chair.
Go ahead.
Would it be acceptable to have a 5-minute break at this time?
Absolutely. Obviously, none of us can speak coherently anymore. Yes, we will break for 5 minutes and return at 9:25. Thank you. All right, I see everybody has rejoined us again. Hopefully everybody is refreshed. Mr. Hissick says he has an hour of battery life left, so comment accordingly. Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question through the staff on one of the, it's not actually about the amount in the budget, it's street light replacement. And I would just like if staff could describe what part the town plays with regards to street lights in Sydney and what part BC Hydro. So we have poles, we have lights, we have underground wiring. Who has what responsibility for street lighting? Please.
Would the engineering team please address? Mr. DeMar, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. I can answer that through the chair and Tamir. The lights that are controlled by BC Hydro are the lights you found on the wooden utility poles. We basically lease the lights from BC Hydro, but they are responsible for all maintenance and operation of those lights. So we just ultimately pay for them. The lights that are on metal poles, more the decorative style, referred to, or ornamental lights, those are the lights that are under the control of the town, and those are considered town lights. So we're responsible for the maintenance and replacement of those lights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under capital budget, tax funded 2021 budget, there's an item in the PowerPoint on page 29, speed reader signs. Through to staff, do we have any of these signs now? And this reference is to signs plural, so how many are we looking to purchase for $20,000?
All yours, Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Robinson, are you still there? You go.
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, I believe these are replacements for the electrified speed reader signs that are currently located on Resthaven Drive and on Beacon Avenue. These are the oldest speed reader signs that we've got in the town, and we're just starting to see the deterioration of the pixels on them. Again, I defer to Mr. DeMar in the engineering department if he has anything else to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Yes, that's correct. Some of our original speed reader signs, in particular on Beacon Avenue coming in off the highway, and another one on Resthaven, are deteriorating. The anodes and lights are starting to fail. So this is a replacement program for those speed reader signs. We do find them valuable because they do also collect data on the speed, as well as educating drivers on their speed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, staff. So they're showing wear and tear. They're still working. Your fear is they may fail. $20,000 would replace 2 of them. I'm looking for ways to reduce tax-funded projects for 2021. Is there any obstacle to phasing this, to at least reducing this to $10,000 in the opinion of staff?
Which one of you? Ms. Clary, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Councillor Rintoul. That is definitely a possibility. We'll also look to see if ICBC has grants to help supplement these costs. But basically the risk is that one of these signs goes, or both the signs go kaput, and we have no money to replace them. So we might be without a sign for a certain amount of time if that does happen.
Okay, thank you. So I'm comfortable with the prospect of if one of them breaks down, the other one could be used and salvaged for parts if we're purchasing a new one. Again, I'm looking for some funding here, and I think this might be an area hopefully we can find $10,000. So I'll move that we reduce in the budget from $20,000 to $10,000 for speed reader sign replacement.
Mr. Hisik was wanting to speak before. I don't know if you want to address this before council moves on it.
I can add this comment before or after the vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Did we have somebody a seconder?
Yeah, I second.
Okay. Discussion. Councillor Wainwright, I'd seen your hand before.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things we should keep in mind is the financial plan and what it's looking like for a tax increase for next year. And every time we do something that is deferring an expense to next year, we make the tax increase for next year, harder to deal with. So cutting it out completely and deciding not to do it, well, I don't really think that's a good idea. But deferring it to a year that looks like it's going to be even tougher than this year, I don't think that's a good strategy, really. I would much rather take the 10,000 from surplus than punt to next year.
Thank you. I've seen Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Garnett.
Oh, no, not me.
Oh, I'm just turning a page. Okay. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
I do have a comment, but I'd like to hear what Mr. Histik has to say.
Thank you, Councillor. We're more than willing to do whatever the will of council is. Just as a reminder, we don't bring these forward for no reason. We get regular requests from the public about speed enforcement, and this will allow us to meet those demands.
If I may, thank you. These are important tools, and maybe not for every driver, but a good percentage of the drivers who come into our community maybe aren't familiar with our speed limits in various parts, and this is just a reminder for them, and it's a safety issue. And $10,000 over public safety on machines that might give out at any day, I think it's well worth the cost, because I consider the safety of our residents to be a top priority. So it's not really an area I'm willing to shave money off of. I think if they put the request forward, they obviously feel we need to keep these machines running in top shape, so, or replace them, whatever the need may be. So I support keeping it in.
Councillor Fallett and then Councillor Rintoul again.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I also will not be supporting the motion. I think about the motion that Council passed recently about being part of the project to reduce speed limits on streets without a center line. And I see in the explanation for this particular project that also looking at potentially all bay for a speed reader. So I think if we're going to talk about a safe community and speed reader signs, I know that when I've been alerted to my speed, it does make a difference. So I think we have to support this. Thank you. As support the expense, not support reducing it.
Madam Chair, I'll withdraw the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Did anyone have another capital project that they wanted to discuss, or did we want to have Mr. Hisik go on with his presentation? Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Where was the thing on, it's only $5,000, but garbage containers for downtown, wherever that was. Oh yeah, and so my question about that was, my recollection is that we did this again, we did this last year, or was it there and we didn't approve it and so it's being brought forward again? So if staff could just remind me of that. Did we approve this last year?
It was approved last year, but we need this to be an ongoing item until sufficient number of containers are replaced. And if Mr. Robinson has anything further to add?
So I guess what I was wondering is, last year I understood it to be a recurring thing, so that every year in the budget starting last year, there was going to be an extra $5,000 to buy garbage containers. So this year, and next year there would be 5,000. So what I'm gathering from this is that now there's going to be $10,000 every year. Like how many garbage containers does $10,000 get us? It just seems like a lot of garbage containers.
Not as many as you think, but it's still only a 5,000 per year program, not 10.
Okay, so this isn't on top of the 5,000 that we approved last year?
No, it's just the annual funding.
Okay, so it's not a recurring project then, as it states here.
No, that's exactly what it is. All of these items are tax-funded items that recur from year to year.
On an annual basis. Okay, I got it. Thanks for that clarification.
Councillor Follett, go ahead.
Just for information, page 154, Councillor O'Keefe, and it's $5,000 for each year up to 2025.
Thank you. Any further comments on capital projects? All right, moving along then. I see there's still more slides here in your presentation, Mr. Hissick, if you'd like to continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's not as many as you might think at this point. We focused on the tax-funded capital, and if there are questions about non-tax projects, that can be addressed tonight or at the next meeting at Council's pleasure. Once we're done with capital, just a few slides to remind us of where we are and what's coming next. So we've talked about the concept of using surplus to balance the budget. We generally land somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 to 450, and this is an effective way to reduce overtaxing, acknowledging that we will generate some savings, but the idea is to give people the money they need to perform their duties and expect them to come back with some savings, and we'll break even. So as mentioned previously, using even more surplus than the 450 currently included is one relatively easy way to reduce the tax burden, and as the mayor has pointed out, if this isn't a rainy day, we're not sure what is. So what this does, though, is in future there will be decisions for council to make as to what is the appropriate level to maintain and whether we should be changing our policy. But in the short term, once council decides on a tax increase number we want to meet, the suggestion will be for whatever still needs to be cut, that it be achieved through additional allocation of surplus. Once everything else is said and done, it'll be down to property taxation, and as we've mentioned over and over, any general increase is applied evenly across the board to all properties unless council decides otherwise. Five-year projection, this is discussed in the report. We have a lot of work ahead of us for 2022 because 6.03% as a projection is far too high, and we know that, and we will get it down before it comes back to you next year. After this meeting, any direction in terms of resolutions will be built into the second draft of the budget. I mentioned earlier that I might have some additional ideas for reductions that I'll bring forward, likely through a brief staff report or part of the next presentation. And we'll consider the second draft of the budget on March 2nd, which is a Tuesday night, set aside specifically for the budget. And the goal will be to achieve approval of the budget as amended on March 2nd. But if we don't get there at that one meeting, we can schedule additional meetings as required. Once the budget's approved, we'll follow up by setting tax rates sometime in late April. But if last year was anything to go by, we might have late breaking news to work into our planning before we do that. that concludes my part of the presentation. If there are any additional questions before we adjourn, I'll leave that up to the chair's discretion. Otherwise, we thank you for your attention and your direction tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. Now, we've been through all of the tax-funded capital projects discussing removal. Did anyone have questions just related to the capital projects and operations that they wanted to bring up just as points of information tonight? Or is everybody looking to go for the next meeting? I see no further questions, so I will look for a motion to adjourn.
So move. Second.
I'll call a question. All in favor? Right. Thank you, everyone. Good night.